Chapter 641, Behind the Door. Watching Dumbledore, Jaina, and Fudge drift away, Ethan also felt that he and his companions could not stay long. He gently urged Onyxia, Tonks, Penelope, and Cyrilla to leave. Although his physical condition had not yet returned to its best, he believed that with Hermione, Zhangqiu, and Ginny by his side, he had the greatest support. At this moment, the other companions still needed to stick to their posts. After all, as the dust of the war settled, the news of Voldemort's return would spread in the wizarding world like wildfire. Fudge's fall had become an indisputable fact, and their current top priority was to fill this power gap, stabilize, and expand the results of the Ministry of Magic. In the hall, the crowd gradually dispersed, leaving only the busy figures of some aurors responsible for the aftermath. Ethan took a deep breath and relaxed his tense body. He ordered softly, "Let's sit down and rest for a few minutes to regain our strength and energy before we go home. I just want to have a good sleep now." Upon hearing this, Hermione quickly took out a roll of plaid carpet from her magical seamless foldable pocket and spread it lightly on the floor. She always prepares all kinds of gadgets to deal with various situations in advance. Zhangqiu transformed into her sphinx form, and her furry lioness body lay gracefully on the carpet, providing Ethan with a comfortable backrest. After everything was arranged, the four of them sat around on the carpet, quietly watching the death hall being cleaned and watching the aurors and employees of the Offician United Company who had fallen. Ginny's brows furrowed tightly, her eyes full of sadness and helplessness. "Too many people died. This battle is too cruel," she said, her voice trembling with sadness that could not be concealed. Before this, the girl had faced all the romance on campus. The only trouble she had was her brother's incomprehension of her and how to get along with Ethan. She was only a witness on the night of the World Cup and the final of the Tri-Wizard tournament. It wasn't until today that she truly saw another side of the world. Ethan nodded in agreement, his eyes lingering on the young corpses, and his heart was also full of melancholy. Yes, these are heroes who died heroically to protect our beloved people and the magical world. He turned to look at Hermione and reminded her, "Hermione, after the list is compiled, you can provide some subsidies to the families of these heroes in the name of Alpha United Company. We cannot let their sacrifices be in vain. We must do our best to take care of their families." This was not only a respect for the fallen heroes, but also a comfort to their families. Hermione nodded heavily, with a relieved smile on her face. "Don't worry, Ethan. I will handle it." Suddenly, Zhangqiu, who had transformed into a sphinx, twitched her nose and her tail swung uneasily. "Besides the smell of blood, what else smells so bad?" Her words broke the sad silence. Hermione frowned slightly. She took a deep breath, trying to distinguish the unpleasant smell, and then immediately came to a conclusion. "If you have learned Muggle medical knowledge, you will know that after death, the muscles will become relaxed due to the loss of electrical signals. This also includes the sphincter and bladder detrusor." However, Zhangqiu interrupted her helplessly. "Hermione, can you say something that I can understand? When it comes to Muggle knowledge, you always use a lot of confusing terms. For these little wizards who grew up in the wizarding world, Muggles' knowledge of physics, chemistry, and biology is still too difficult." Hermione smiled awkwardly. "In short, people may become incontinent after death." She tried her best to sound relaxed, but the discomfort in her heart could not be concealed. She also couldn't wait to leave here and return to her quiet home with Ethan. Just as they were enjoying the rare silence, suddenly, without any warning, a weird scream came from the depths of the archway Behia, in the plaid carpet. The voice seemed like an evil spirit breaking free from the abyss of hell, carrying endless terror and despair, which made people feel horrified. At the same time, a powerful attraction suddenly surged within the windlass and automatic curtain, swallowing everything around it like a black hole. At the moment when this attraction was raging, another thrust suddenly came from nowhere. The two forces intertwined and instantly pushed Ethan, Hermione, Zhangqiu, and Ginny towards the arch. In fact, whether it was the weird attraction or the sudden push, their main target was Ethan. The three girls were just held by his side and ruthlessly involved in this unknown disaster. Although Ethan didn't have time to figure out what was going on, his instinctive reaction saved his and the girls' lives. He quickly cast Thunderwave, a powerful repulsive magic that could push enemies away instantly. At this critical moment, he did not hesitate to direct this power towards the three girls, rescuing them from the claws of gravity and thrust. However, as the main target of these two sudden forces, Ethan had no regard for his own safety. His entire body was almost drawn into the other end of the curtain, as if he was about to be swallowed into an endless world of darkness. At this life-and-death moment, he could only rely on his courage and wisdom to try to find a glimmer of hope. When Ethan passed through the curtain that seemed ordinary but contained endless mysteries, he felt an unprecedented shock. The two ends of the arch looked the same, as if they were just an ordinary door, but in fact, they hid a real, invisible one-way barrier. This barrier was like an indestructible boundary, ensuring that this door could only be entered but not exited. Behind the door, there was frantic chaos and invisible death, as if entering another dimension, a desolation of order and law at the edge of the world. In this desert, Ethan felt an unspeakable loneliness and despair. There was no sky, no earth, no sun, no stars shining here. The surroundings emitted a dim gray light, and what came towards him was endless gray fog. These gray fogs were like the incarnation of death, permeating every corner, making it impossible to breathe and escape. In this dead desert, Ethan seemed to feel the end of everything. Time lost its meaning here, and space became distorted and blurred. He felt as if he was in an eternal nothingness, isolated from the world, lonely and helpless. At first, Ethan felt that he was familiar with this place, but he soon understood why. Before traveling to this world, he had passed through this place vaguely. That sense of familiarity came from the memory fragments deep in his heart. These fragments were awakened at this moment, giving him a deeper understanding of this desert. So, behind this curtain is actually the edge of the world, Ethan murmured to himself. The attraction and push I have always felt before is actually the repulsion of the world. The world was trying to push me, the outsider, out of it. A flash of inspiration crossed Ethan's mind, and he vaguely guessed the reason for all this happening. As early as when he first entered the death hall, he had noticed something strange. At that time, he was still highly vigilant about this arch. However, the continuous fighting had greatly consumed his energy. Exhausted, he gradually relaxed his vigilance and finally sat in front of the arch with several female companions without any scruples. At that moment, he completely gave up his vigilance and immersed himself in a moment of tranquility. Now that he was in danger, he paid a heavy price for that slackness. Unfortunately, this kind of analysis and speculation seemed to be of no help to his current situation. He stood at the edge of the world blankly, not knowing how to get back to the other side of the curtain. The power of nature had become impossible to display here, and psychic powers had also lost their former effectiveness. Although magic power could still be used, it was limited in this desolate place. It felt quite stagnant, as if casting magic here required 10 times or more of the original magical power. At this moment, he had very little magic power left. Ethan tried several kinds of magic, but those that interfered with physics had no effect here. Everything around him no longer seemed to follow the normal laws of physics, rendering his magic useless. The spell to manipulate space, in this place with extremely chaotic spatial coordinates, had a completely different effect, plunging him into a deeper dilemma. He could only watch himself getting further and further away from the curtain. His heart sank suddenly, and despair and unwillingness overwhelmed him like a raging tide. He realized that he was going to die and disappear at the edge of this desolate world. Chapter 642, The Book of Knowledge reappears. Ethan also knew that temporary death does not mean permanent disappearance. No matter which world they are in, mages still care about their own survival, Dumbledore being a special case. Just like his old rival Voldemort could be reborn with the help of Horcruxes, as a mage of the same level, Ethan had also prepared means for his own resurrection. In the basement of the tower, Ethan had already used the clone technique to create a replica human body. This body was like a lifeboat he had prepared for himself as a backup in case of disaster. If his life truly came to an end here, his spirit would automatically return to the distant tower, gently merge into the long-awaited body, and be reborn. However, this did not come without a cost. Although the clone technique is magical, it is not omnipotent. It can clone a body that looks exactly the same, but it cannot perfectly replicate the body Ethan obtained through wilderness transformation. This means that if Ethan really needed to be reborn in a new body, he would instantly lose that powerful power and become much weaker. This is the price he must pay for resurrection, and it is the bargaining chip in his game with death. What's worse is that in this special space, even Ethan himself couldn't guarantee whether this method of resurrection would actually work. The laws and order here seemed completely different from the outside world, and everything was full of unknowns and variables. Just when Ethan was in the quagmire of despair and almost giving up all hope, he suddenly felt a strange surge of power coming from the magic pocket around his waist. This power seemed to be alive, eager to break free and be released. Immediately afterwards, a book slowly emerged from his pocket, its appearance like a ray of dawn that instantly cut through the darkness in Ethan's heart. Ethan's eyes widened as he looked at the book in disbelief. He still clearly remembered that this book was a precious gift given to him by Gianna when he first met her. It was not an ordinary book, but a strange book full of magic. No one could reveal its secrets except the chosen ones. Ethan had once affectionately called it the Book of Knowledge. At the beginning, this book had shown him the secret of space magic, leading him to move forward on this path and make great progress. It even gave him an extremely precious demiplane seed, which was a stepping stone for him to explore higher levels of magic. There was a unique mark drawn on the cover of this book. Whether in the world of Warcraft or the world of Harry Potter, this intellectual mark should only be known to Ethan. At first, Ethan had guessed that the book might come from another time traveler or from his future self. From the moment he was able to successfully open the book, he preferred the latter. Therefore, he had always regarded this book as his most precious treasure and always carried it with him. However, since it was first opened, this book had never shown any magic, as if it had fallen into a deep sleep. Until now, at this life-or-death moment, it finally woke up again. Ethan watched intently as the magic book suddenly flew into the air and hovered directly in front of him. The pages of the book spread out automatically without anyone touching them, as if an invisible hand was gently flipping through them. Immediately afterwards, a powerful force of space spurted out from the book like a torrent, instantly wrapping Ethan tightly. This force was like an invisible hand, locking his figure firmly, making him unable to move. Feeling the power and mystery of this force, Ethan did not choose to resist. He knew very well that in this chaotic and disorderly space, any rash action might bring unpredictable consequences. Therefore, he chose to trust this book and this power from the unknown world. What's more, was it possible that this power was unknown? Ethan felt the power of this space carefully and suddenly found that it seemed to contain a familiar style. The exquisite and simple spell, the work, the weaving technique that directly points to the origin of the rules, as well as the detailed processing that embodies the beauty of magic, are clearly his own style. However, compared to the level of Ethan's arrow, this spell is much better. It was more sophisticated and complex, containing many magical principles he had never seen before. It can be said that the creator of this spell could be called Ethan's Ultra Pro Plus MX version. What is surprising is that this terrifyingly huge force of space actually ignored the surrounding chaotic laws and directly activated the teleportation spell. Ethan only felt a spin, as if his whole body was drawn into a rapidly rotating space channel. The other end of this passage was so far away that it could almost be called another world. However, no matter how far he was teleported, it was still much better than staying in this dead Jedi. Ethan felt an inexplicable expectation and excitement in his heart, as if he saw hope of escaping from the predicament. As the magic aura flickered and the passage gradually shrank, his figure became blurred and finally disappeared behind the curtain. In fact, all of the above happened in just 4 or 5 seconds. Then, the repulsive and gravitational forces inside and outside the curtain disappeared, and everything returned to calm, as if everything that had just happened was merely an illusion. This incident happened so quickly and suddenly that the Aurors and employees of the Offensive United Company, who were busy cleaning the battlefield in the room, were stunned and had no time to react. They stood there blankly, their eyes full of shock and confusion. Death Eaters? Jiang Chu's voice sounded first. Before she landed, she had already transformed back into her human form. She quickly pulled out her wand and stood up vigilantly. However, as Ethan's backer, she had kept her back to the arch and did not see the situation behind her, so she knew nothing about what had just happened. Ginny and Hermione, who fell to the ground towards the arch, witnessed with their own eyes the scene of Ethan being drawn into the other side of the curtain. They clearly saw Ethan's final disappearance and felt an unspeakable sadness in their hearts. Ethan! Ginny's call echoed in the air, and she stretched out her trembling hands in vain, as if she could pass through the invisible curtain and pull Ethan back from the unknown darkness. However, she knew that this was just a helpless cry in her heart. Ethan had disappeared, and his figure could no longer be found in this space. At the same time, Hermione was also deep in thought. Her brows were furrowed, as if she was trying to recall every detail of what had just happened. However, it all happened so fast and suddenly that she didn't even have time to fully understand why Ethan disappeared. Ethan? What's wrong with Ethan? Jiang Chu saw the expressions of Ginny and Hermione and immediately realized that something was wrong. Turning around suddenly, she found that the spot where Ethan had just been sitting was already flat. Ethan? Jiang Chu's voice was trembling. She glanced around, trying to find that familiar figure. However, no matter how hard she searched, Ethan never appeared. Where is Ethan? Where has he gone? What just happened? Jiang Chu rushed to the two girls who were still sitting on the ground. She looked at Ginny, who was in tears, and Hermione, who was deep in thought, and felt a strong uneasiness in her heart. She held Hermione's shoulders with her hands, trying to wake her from her thoughts. However, Hermione seemed to have fallen into another world and had no response to her call. It stayed like this for a few seconds. "Don't disturb me, Jiang Chu." Hermione's voice was still calm and firm, but it was inevitably mixed with a hint of distress. She broke away from Jiang Chu's clenched hands and bit her lower lip hard. The severe pain eased her mood slightly. The scene of Ethan being sucked into the curtain kept replaying in her mind, and every detail was presented vividly. In slow motion, she noticed that Ethan's figure did not become insubstantial or fade as usual, which was inconsistent with all the records she had read before about the reflection of prisoners during the execution of the Death Hall Arch when it was used as a torture device. Moreover, after Ethan crossed the veil, he did not get further and further away until he completely disappeared. On the contrary, a book suddenly appeared on his chest, and then he vanished in an instant. This was obviously a sign of teleportation magic. Chapter 643. Where is Ethan? Hermione, what happened? Jiang Chu asked anxiously. Since Ethan's disappearance, the once elegant and composed Oriental beauty seemed to have lost her poise. Jiang Chu stared at Hermione intently, her hands unconsciously clenched into fists. Seeing Hermione's silence, she felt a strong urge to use the Detect Thought spell to uncover the truth. However, she knew Hermione was skilled in occlumency, making the spell likely ineffective. It was Ginny who finally broke the silence. Just an accident happened. Ginny's voice trembled, tears welling up as she recounted the event. A strange force appeared, pulling us towards the arch. Ethan, he only had time to push us away before he was pulled into the curtain by the force. Ginny's voice broke, and she burst into tears, her sobs echoing in the room. As Jiang Chu listened to Ginny's account, a chill ran through her body, leaving her cold and stiff. She stood frozen, then slowly released her grip on Hermione's shoulders. Her eyes were vacant and unfocused, tears streaming down her cheeks. She took a deep breath, clutching her wand tightly, and began to move towards the arch with heavy, determined steps. It wasn't until Jiang Chu had taken several steps that Hermione snapped out of her daze and noticed her movements. Realizing Jiang Chu's intention, a sense of urgency surged within her. She knew she had to stop her immediately. Hermione leaped forward, rushing to Jiang Chu and hugging her tightly. "Jiang Chu, you can't do this." Hermione's voice trembled with fear. That arch was used for executions. If you walk in, you'll die. But Zhang Chu seemed lost in her own world. She struggled to break free from Hermione's grip and continued towards the arch. Hermione's strength alone wasn't enough to hold her back. Desperately, she shouted, "Stop her! Stop her quickly!" Nearby Aurors and employees of Alpha United Company sprang into action. They rushed forward, standing in front of Zhang Chu to block her path. "Miss Zhang Chu, Miss Granger is right. We can't let you go in like this." Suddenly, Zhang Chu transformed into her animagus form, a giant sphinx. Her size and strength increased instantly, and she effortlessly flicked away the wizards blocking her path. "I'm gonna find Ethan. Don't stop me," she declared, her voice deep and powerful, resonating with the ancient magic of the Sphinx. The Aurors were momentarily paralyzed by her power. Hermione, still clinging to the Sphinx's massive wings, shouted, "Don't worry, Zhang Chu. Ethan may still be alive." His situation didn't match the recorded cases of people walking into the curtain. It might have been some kind of force that teleported him away. "We need to research this. Headmaster Dumbledore is also here. He might know something. You can't rush in blindly. Ethan wouldn't want you to die. Together, we can find him and bring him back." Despite Hermione's pleas, Zhang Chu showed no sign of giving up. She gently shook her wings, but didn't throw Hermione off. "A drowning person will cling to a straw, Hermione. You fear death, but I do not. If you stop me again, don't blame me for being rude," Hermione said firmly. She shook her head, knowing that Zhang Chu could no longer listen to any advice at this time. So, she transformed into her cat-human form and managed to restrain Zhang Chu. Her voice gradually calmed down, but there was an undeniable determination in her tone. "Zhang Chu, listen to me. I will rescue Ethan. Give me some time, okay? I will definitely find him." Zhang Chu was slightly stunned. She looked into Hermione's serious eyes, and the anxiety in her heart eased a little. However, she still couldn't completely let go. "What you want to do is your business. Leave me alone. I can't wait that long. Ethan needs me now, and I'm going to find him right away. Now, let me go." "Ethan is not dead." Just as everyone's discussion became more and more desperate, a familiar voice suddenly sounded. Zhang Chu stopped for a moment. She quickly turned around and saw a mature, black-haired figure walking out of the shadows. It was Onyxia. Watching Onyxia slowly descend the stone steps, Zhang Chu stopped moving her lion legs and raised her brows slightly, filled with eagerness and expectation. "How do you know?" she asked. "Miss Presto, Ethan was pushed behind the curtain of the arch by an inexplicable force," Hermione said hurriedly, stepping forward to tell Onyxia about Ethan. She spoke quickly, but every word was clear and powerful, detailing all the events and her speculations. Although Onyxia was not a true companion, but had been captured by Ethan, Hermione chose to trust her at this moment. After all, Onyxia was a black dragon princess from another world, possessing great strength and wisdom. In her opinion, Onyxia might be able to provide some insight from a different perspective. After listening to Hermione's narration, Onyxia simply said, "I can guarantee that Ethan is fine." Seeing the others still confused, Onyxia curled her lips slightly and said disdainfully, "I signed a contract with him. If Ethan really dies, how can I still stand here? Either I would die with him, or the seal would be lifted. In short, it is absolutely impossible to maintain the status quo." "How do you prove that what you said is true?" Zhang Chu asked with a hint of doubt in her tone. Although she already believed Onyxia's words in her heart, she still questioned her further, staring closely into her eyes, trying to detect any trace of deceit. "Iwu can prove it." At that moment, a little head suddenly popped out from behind Onyxia. It was Iwu, Ethan's magical pet. Seeing Iwu appear, Zhang Chu breathed a sigh of relief. In her heart, Iwu was Ethan's true partner, someone who lived and died with him. Her appearance undoubtedly added credibility to Onyxia's words. "So Iwu, can you feel where your master is?" Ginny asked eagerly, her eyes full of anticipation. Among the girls present, she was the youngest and most helpless. She couldn't wait to get some clues about Ethan from Iwu. Iwu closed her eyes and raised her head as if entering a meditative state. Her little face was full of seriousness and concentration, as if she was trying hard to find the slightest connection with her master. However, she soon opened her eyes, with a trace of frustration in them. "No, I can't. Aiwu said in a low voice. If the master is still in this world, even if he is on the other side of the earth, Aiwu can feel his thoughts. But I can't do it now. The master is in a place far away. Hearing this, Ginny's eyes turned red and tears welled up. She bit her lower lip tightly, trying not to cry. Seeing Ginny's red eyes, Aiwu quickly added, "But don't worry. If the master has any news, Aiwu will definitely tell you as soon as possible." Chapter 644, Traveling Through the World. As a time traveler, Ethan Levine is currently experiencing the most unique and vivid journey of his life. This is the first time he has encountered such an experience. He felt as if he were imprisoned in a crystal-clear glass marble. With this marble, he embarked on a long corridor filled with darkness and chaos. In this corridor, time seemed to have lost its original meaning, becoming vague and elusive. Space was also distorted and ever-changing in this chaos, making it impossible to distinguish up, down, left, and right. Ethan didn't know how long he had spent in this void, nor how far he had traveled. He just waited quietly, looking forward to the arrival of the unknown. Suddenly, the surrounding scene changed drastically. The once boundless darkness instantly dissipated, replaced by a colorful, kaleidoscope-like dreamy world. Ethan felt like Shawshank, who had just emerged from a long sewer and regained his life. This comparison was not a metaphor, as the scenery around Ethan truly resembled a kaleidoscope. Ethan felt as if he were floating in an endless bubble bath. These bubbles were huge and colorful, emitting a charming light, like exquisite works of art. He looked around, seeing these breathtaking bubbles both near and far, as if he were in a dreamlike wonderland. Suddenly, Ethan turned around and looked behind him. There was a huge, radiant bubble floating there, which was the world of Harry Potter that he had just left. He stared at this familiar yet unfamiliar bubble, feeling an inexplicable emotion in his heart. In this world, he had once lived, struggled, and left countless precious memories. Ethan finally understood that these beautiful bubbles were not simple illusions, but real worlds, the so-called world bubbles. Each bubble represented a unique world, containing endless mysteries and possibilities. The Harry Potter world bubble behind him was just one of these countless worlds. He looked around and found that although the other bubbles appeared much smaller than the Harry Potter world bubble, this was only due to the visual effect of near and far. In this strange space that transcended the laws of physics, visual distance was not directly related to the actual time required to reach these worlds. This meant that even bubbles that appeared close at hand might take a long time to reach. But no matter what, Ethan finally confirmed that he had truly left the world of Harry Potter, and the Book of Knowledge was indeed going to take him to a new world. At this time, Ethan was full of doubts and shock. He couldn't understand how his future self could accomplish such amazing feats. He knew that breaking through the barriers of the world bubble required not only a superb level of magical power, but also a vast magic power reserve. Ethan estimated that even if Dumbledore, Voldemort, and Grindelwald, the three giants of the wizarding world, joined forces to provide energy, they would not be able to achieve it even if they were drained. However, the fact was right in front of him. The mysterious Book of Knowledge not only stored a magic formula that he could not comprehend, but also contained the power to activate this formula. All this made Ethan feel incredulous, but at the same time, it stimulated his desire to explore unknown magic. Now outside the world, Ethan could at least solve the problem of technical theory. Ethan stared at the modeled scenery in front of him, feeling the unique laws here. His brain involuntarily ran at overdrive, trying to understand and comprehend these unfamiliar rules. Just like when he first learned magic, he could immediately grasp it and draw inferences about other cases. As he traveled through this unknown space, driven by the time-traveling spell, Ethan's understanding of the world outside grew deeper and deeper. He could clearly feel that, although this area seemed to be outside the world, it was actually closely related to every world within it. In other words, he was on the brink of discovering something monumental. This is the real source of all things, and those so-called world bubbles are merely the products of the gathering and gestation of chaotic laws in this space. In other words, compared to the worlds produced by evolution, this is the true origin of everything. The so-called world bubble is just the result of the chaotic laws of this space coming together and developing. This is the law of the universe, the mystery of the cycle of life, the place where all essences and roots are formed, and where all truths and laws are born. After staying here for a while, Ethan felt that his understanding of the rules had improved to a higher level, and he was finally able to comprehend the so-called art of traveling through worlds. However, reality did not afford Ethan much leisure, because in the blink of an eye, he had almost touched the target world bubble. At this moment, he felt a little strange, as it was not like a single world bubble, but more like a river with many tributaries, or a branch with spreading offshoots. As the distance between him and his target grew closer, Ethan began to feel that this world was very different from the world of Harry Potter. From the outside, he seemed to be able to glimpse the long river of time that this world bubble had experienced. Its origin was clearly identifiable. As time went by, this world bubble continued to evolve and diverge, creating parallel worlds one after another. Each went in different directions, forming unique world lines. This reminded Ethan of the DC and Marvel worlds that are constantly being rebooted. Starting from the source, this world bubble continued to evolve and diverge with the flow of time, forming parallel worlds, each going in different directions, with different world lines existing simultaneously, somewhat similar to the DC and Marvel worlds that are constantly restarting. However, this world bubble was different from DC and Marvel. The many world lines in this world bubble did not spread disorderly, but had a clear backbone. Various parallel worlds either merged into this trunk or terminated abruptly at a certain node. Only this backbone, diverging and moving forward, seemed to have no end. Ethan felt an inexplicable throbbing in his heart. He seemed to sense an invisible force deliberately pruning these world lines to maintain their mysterious sequence. Just as Ethan was immersed in these astonishing discoveries, the time travel technique suddenly activated, pushing him quickly closer to the main trunk of the world bubble. He had almost no time to react and could only let himself plunge into the main body of this world under the influence of this force. Just when Ethan was about to touch the target world bubble, he suddenly noticed an abnormal fluctuation in front of him. The waves were like a sudden tide on the seashore, surging and carrying irresistible power. As a time traveler, Ethan was unfortunately caught in this unknown tide of time and space. However, at this critical moment, a flash of realization crossed Ethan's mind. This might not be a simple accident, but the guidance of some hidden power of the time-traveling technique. Otherwise, how could he encounter this tide of time and space so coincidentally? As the tide surged, Ethan was shocked to find that he was swimming upstream and being sucked into a point in time that the world had already experienced. In other words, a time travel to the past occurred in this world, and Ethan was involved in it. In fact, for most worlds, time travel is a taboo against the laws of nature. Especially looking back at the past for a long time can often lead to unforeseen serious consequences. Something similar has happened throughout the history of the Harry Potter universe. Therefore, when Ethan realized that he was involved in this, he was shocked beyond words. God knows what impact this sudden time travel might have on him. If he could control the time-traveling technique with his cautious nature, he would never risk setting foot in this restricted area. However, from beginning to end, Ethan's journey through time was marked by passivity and helplessness. He couldn't control his own destiny and could only passively accept all the arrangements laid out for him. Soon, Ethan felt a violent vibration. He suddenly fell from his original world into a dark and chaotic realm. He had entered this new world. After what seemed like an endless journey, Ethan suddenly felt everything around him begin to spin wildly, pulling him into a massive vortex. His heartbeat accelerated, and his breathing became rapid. At that moment, a crack in space suddenly opened before his eyes, like a gaping maw of darkness swallowing everything. Ethan only had time to utter an exclamation before he felt as if an invisible hand had pushed him into the crack. His whole body tumbled through the air, the world spinning around him, and the scenery changed instantly. The boundless chaos was replaced by a clear and vivid picture. Light and darkness intertwined, the sky was high and vast, the earth solid and thick, and the flowers, plants, and trees were full of vitality, outlining a complete and vivid world. He seemed to have arrived at the main material plane of this world. He appeared in the sky, falling continuously. Just before he was about to hit the ground, Ethan's mind moved slightly, and his psychic powers activated telekinesis, which held his body firmly and allowed him to land gently. Ethan looked around, feeling an inexplicable sense of joy in his heart. The environment of this world was quite similar to the blue star he was familiar with. It was not an extremely harsh foreign land where humans couldn't survive. However, something was wrong with the place where he had landed. The air was filled with a strong smell of blood, which was nauseating. The ground beneath his feet was stained with strange green and red colors, creating a tragic scene. Ethan took a closer look and took a deep breath. He realized he had appeared on a battlefield. Chapter 645, Night Elves and Demons. Bodies were scattered all around, and broken limbs could be seen everywhere. Blood and soil were mixed together, forming a shocking scene. Where is this? Ethan murmured to himself, the shock in his heart beyond words. He had just traveled to a new world bubble. How could he appear directly on such a tragic battlefield? Well, amidst the continuous shouts of death on the battlefield, Ethan suddenly heard a faint groan coming from beneath a pile of corpses. He walked over carefully, and under the light of the bright moon hanging high in the sky, he could clearly see the appearance of these corpses. They all had human-like facial features, but their skin was a strange violet color. They were about 2 meters tall, and their ears were long and pointed, elf ears. These features made Ethan instantly realize that these corpses were not human, but belonged to some kind of fantasy creature that often appears in fantasy works, night elves. The corpses of these night elves were covered with wounds caused by various unknown weapons, and some had broken arms and legs. The scene was horrific. The dark red semi-dried blood almost dyed their bodies, and the nearby ground red. Around them, there were some standing figures, and these figures were obviously not of the same race as the corpses of the night elves. These standing figures were even taller, some reaching 2 or 3 meters, or even higher. They looked ferocious and terrifying, wearing heavy armor and holding exaggerated alien blades. They were applying wounds to the corpses of the night elves one by one, seeming to be clearing the battlefield. Ethan simply glanced around, but his pupils suddenly tightened. He immediately recognized the identities of the figures in front of him. Demons. Night elves and demons! Ethan murmured in shock, a glint of disbelief flashing in his eyes. As a former World of Warcraft player, since Ethan recognized Jaina and Onyxia, he also recognized these figures in front of him. Being on the battlefield, Ethan knew he didn't have much time to sort out his chaotic thoughts. However, just as he was trying to figure out whether he had really arrived in Azeroth, a ferocious-looking Doomguard suddenly passed by from above and noticed the movement here. It flapped its huge fleshy wings, drew a strange arc in the air, and rushed straight towards Ethan's direction. Ethan's heart sank suddenly, and he knew he had to take action as soon as possible. He glanced around and found that there seemed to be other night elves not far away, riding a hippogriff and fighting another demon in the air. From his point of view, the other party did not seem to notice him. Ethan frowned slightly, and an idea quickly flashed in his mind. He recalled a complex magic dragon transformation he learned from Onyxia. This magic could turn the dragon into any race, and it was almost impossible to be discovered, and it would not be restored by most evil-breaking effects. The only disadvantage was that this transformation technique could not choose the appearance arbitrarily. It would only change the caster into a fixed appearance that matched the original appearance. If a dragon was handsome as a dragon, he wouldn't be too ugly as a human. If a dragon had hair on its chest after its transformation, then the scales on its chest must also be dense as a dragon. Ethan took a deep breath and began to recite the mantra silently. As the spellcasting began, his body gradually changed. In the blink of an eye, the Doomguard discovered that the unknown creature in front of them had suddenly turned into a night elf with blue-black hair and golden eyes. His face became full of night elf style, and his body exuded an aura similar to that of the surrounding creatures. The Doom Guards did not recognize Ethan's transformation, but as arrogant as they were, they never disdained to pay too much attention to an existence as weak as an ant. In midair, one of them raised the broad-bladed, two-handed giant sword high in his hands. The Doom Guard oohed with a bloodthirsty and ferocious smile on his face. "Insignificant mortals, your world will surely burn for Sargeras," he roared, his voice echoing across the battlefield like thunder. As he bellowed, the giant blade in his hand swung towards Ethan with a sharp sound slicing through the wind. The Doomguard's attacks were powerful and heavy, each blow capable of tearing ordinary creatures to pieces. However, in Ethan's eyes, these attacks were full of flaws. With his heightened perception, he clearly sensed the trajectory of the opponent's swing. Despite his agility being only slightly above average, he easily dodged the attack. Thud! The dull sound of the giant sword cutting into a pile of corpses echoed beside him. Ethan raised his hand and began to counterattack. From the ground next to the pile of corpses, thick vines suddenly emerged, wrapping around the Doom Guard's weapon like living snakes. The power of these vines was surprisingly strong, preventing the Doom Guard from swinging his giant blade. Roar! The Doom Guard glanced at the night elf opposite him, clearly not expecting this seemingly weak creature to cast spells and fight back. But soon, he recovered from his surprise, and green flames suddenly rose from the swords in his hands. With a whoosh, the green flames burned fiercely, quickly incinerating the vines summoned by Ethan. A ferocious smile reappeared on the Doom Guard's face as he seemed eager to see Ethan slaughtered. The Doom Guard let out a deafening roar, raised his two-handed sword above his head, and prepared to launch a ferocious jump attack towards Ethan's position. His eyes flashed with bloodthirsty light, as if he had already considered Ethan a trapped prey. "Suffer death!" the Doom Guard roared, his muscles tensing as he prepared to leap. However, just as he was about to jump, a strange sound came from below. Crash! The Doom Guard was shocked to find his feet tightly entangled with countless vines, unable to move. These vines had emerged from the ground at some unknown time, binding him firmly in place. The power of his leap was instantly neutralized by the vines, and his whole body was violently pulled down. His ferocious jump attack was completely thwarted. Whizzing! Immediately afterwards, several arrows pierced the night sky, rushing towards the Doom Guard with sharp whistling sounds. These arrows struck the Doom Guard's body accurately, and the additional force on the arrows made him lose his balance. Dragged by the vines, the Doom Guard roared and fell on his back, hitting the ground about 5 meters in front of Ethan. The strange red and green soil was splashed by the impact, forming a trail of dust. Ethan was not affected at all. His eyes flashed with determination as he raised his hand again. More and more vines emerged from the ground, wrapping around the Doom Guard's arms, neck, and waist like living snakes, tying him firmly to the ground. At the same time, the ground beneath the Doom Guard began to dent, as if a bloody mouth had opened, trying to swallow him whole. During the struggle, the Doom Guard sank deeper and deeper, his ferocious roars gradually turning into howls. The sound of bones being crushed made the scene even more horrifying. As the Doom Guard struggled, he sank deeper into the ground, his roars turning into desperate howls mixed with the sound of bones breaking. When only his head remained above the ground, he finally lost all signs of life, his wide-eyed expression still reflecting the fear and unwillingness he felt before his death. Above, a large purple bird with huge wings flapped gracefully through the sky. Its feathers shone with a mysterious luster in the moonlight, looking very elegant. Just as the large, four-legged purple bird was about to fly out of sight, a slim female night elf, clad in a battle priest's light armor, suddenly leaped off the bird's back. She landed gracefully in front of Ethan Quee. Ethan immediately noticed her sudden appearance. Her face was beautiful and dignified, and her eyes shone with determination. E was clearly a battle-hardened warrior, and the one who had shot the arrow moments ago. She first glanced at the Doomsday Guard, now lifeless not far away, with a look of surprise and unease flashing in her eyes. It was evident she had never seen a Doom Guard die in such a painful manner. However, she quickly retracted her gaze, turned to Ethan, and asked in an urgent tone, "Are you okay?" Ethan could tell that the deep concern and worry in her voice were genuine. Thanks to his constant use of language understanding magic, he could easily comprehend what she was saying. He nodded and replied with a smile. My name is Ethan Quaye. Thank you for your timely help. The name Quaye was actually an adaptation of Ethan's original name Ye, to better integrate into this strange world, much like how he had named himself Grimm in the Harry Potter world. Ethan had not forgotten his situation and purpose. He recalled the wizards who had died under Voldemort, allowing his face to show a sad expression as he asked, "Why are you here? What happened? In the new January, please send me a wave of flowers, monthly tickets, recommendation tickets, and custom orders. This is really important to the author." The plot has finally advanced to this point. The World of Warcraft chapter will return to the Harry Potter world in about chapter 40 or 50, and the floating city will also begin to officially advance. I hope you will support it. Chapter 646, Tyrande Whisperwind. Ethan stared at the young night elf standing before him. Her face was adorned with purple facial lines, resembling a mysterious totem that added an enigmatic charm to her appearance. Her long blue hair was elegantly tied into a high ponytail, swaying gently with her movements, like a clear spring flowing under the moonlight. Her expression was resolute, and her eyes burned with intensity. Beneath her beautiful exterior, it was evident that an unyielding warrior's soul resided. "Hello, Mr. Ethan." The night elf's voice was as sweet as a silver bell. She nodded slightly in greeting. "My name is Tyrande Whisperwind. Our team was on a mission, and I passed by here on the way. Unfortunately, we were attacked by a demon." Her voice trembled slightly, and her expression grew somber as she recalled the tragic battle. "Now, I am the only one left from my team. Tyrande?" Ethan was taken aback upon hearing the name. As a former World of Warcraft player, he was certainly familiar with Tyrande Whisperwind. She was one of the most significant figures among the Night Elves during the War of the Ancients, and even held the position of leader of the Night Elves 10,000 years later. He carefully observed Tyrande before him. Even with Ethan's experienced eyes, this girl was indeed incredibly beautiful. Moreover, there was no arrogance or condescension in her demeanor, traits often found in clergy. Instead, she was youthful, lively, friendly, and generous. More importantly, her gentle and friendly voice was like a melodious song echoing in an empty valley, leaving a lingering, pleasant feeling. A smile unconsciously formed on his lips. It was indeed the kind of beauty that could turn brothers Malfurion and Illidan against each other. At this moment, Tyrande's bright eyes were filled with worry and expectation, waiting for Ethan's response. The traveler took a deep breath and looked up at the burning battlefield. The war was raging, and the air was thick with smoke. This was a land that belonged to warriors. He felt the magic and power in the air, and an inexplicable excitement surged within him. "So, I have indeed come to the World of Warcraft," Ethan finally confirmed. The planet he was on was Azeroth, a place full of mystery and legend. The sudden wave of traveling through time and space was likely caused by Nosdormu, the dragon that guards time. He recalled the plot of the original story. In that timeline, Nosdormu had sent the human mage Ronan, the red dragon Crossus, and the orc warrior Broxigar back to the distant past, 10,000 years ago. It was during the Ancient War, where the Night Elves and the Burning Legion were locked in fierce combat. Ethan sighed, feeling a mix of emotions. He couldn't tell whether this timing was good or bad. In this era, the various races in World of Warcraft, humans, orcs, blood elves, dwarves, undead, etc., had not yet been born. Countless familiar people and things had not yet come into existence. The dominant mortal race in the world was the noble and mysterious Night Elves, and this world was facing a massive threat from the invasion of the Burning Legion, teetering on the brink of destruction. However, chaos is also a ladder. If he were facing a stable Night Elf empire, as an outsider, it would be difficult for him to achieve anything here. On the contrary, in this time of war, anything was possible. Thinking of this, Ethan couldn't help but shake his head slightly. "Sorry, Tyrande, I am a druid from the border of Zuldazar. I left the Empire before and embarked on a journey to explore the legendary country where the Pandaren live. I just returned here recently. I didn't expect that in the blink of an eye, the world would turn out like this." As he spoke, he showed a sincere expression and said, Can you please explain the current situation to me? I feel a little at a loss about these sudden changes. To be a night elf bumpkin from the frontier was Ethan's last-minute plan. At the critical moment of the demonic invasion, appearing in his original human form in the country of the night elves could easily get him mistaken for a spy sent by the demons. After all, the demon races come in many different forms. The night elves would inevitably be wary of all the alien races they had never seen before, and there was no guarantee they wouldn't regard all unfamiliar beings as demons. Even if Ethan was lucky, as a human, it would be difficult to obtain information from the night elves. So, from the beginning, he planned to blend in as a night elf. However, as a night elf, it was impossible for him to know nothing about this world. So he created an image for himself as a country bumpkin from the frontier who didn't know much about the world, coupled with an experience of visiting the panda people as his cover. This way, he could use this identity as an excuse to ask questions openly and honestly, and at the same time, ask other people various questions reasonably without worrying about arousing unnecessary suspicion. Even if he didn't have social connections, it was okay. The problem was that his hometown was slaughtered by demons. After all, in this world's backward political governance level, even Queen Ashara's power could not reach every corner, let alone verify a single household registration, the identity of an orphan who has no identity. Tyrande looked at the druid in front of her, who claimed to be from the frontier, and couldn't help but feel a trace of doubt in her heart. For a young woman, characters like Ethan were indeed rare. If she were in the future, she might have doubts about Ethan, but now she was young after all, and it might be that Ethan had shown the ability of a druid. Tyrande didn't have much doubt about Ethan and told him everything about the current situation of the Night Elves. In ancient times, the Night Elves were not the beautiful people they are today. The origin of the world is closely connected with a magical well, the Well of Eternity. Nourished by this mysterious well, these trolls living near the Well of Eternity, as a branch of the tribe, quietly began their journey of evolution. As time went by, their appearance gradually lost its former ugliness and roughness, replaced by a gradually emerging elegance and wisdom. They abandoned their original barbaric customs and longed to embrace the light of civilization. As a result, a new species was born on the ancient continent of Kalimdor, and they were given the new name of Night Elves. The Night Elves were full of curiosity and desire for the secrets of the Well of Eternity. They delved into the magic of the well water and explored the mysteries contained within it. This persistence and wisdom allowed their civilization to rise rapidly, and their living area continued to expand as their power increased. On the ancient continent of Kalimdor, they became a powerful force that could not be ignored. However, Night Elf society was not monolithic. The Night Elves, who were a different class of civilians from the Upper Elves who mastered arcane energy through the Well of Eternity, paid more attention to harmonious coexistence with nature. They revered nature and respected every life. This simple life concept gradually attracted the attention of a great being. He was the forest demigod Cenarius. Cenarius was highly vigilant about the use of arcane magic by the nobles in the Night Elf Empire, but he was deeply attracted by the love and respect for nature of the common Night Elves. He observed them and communicated with them, and the two sides gradually established a deep friendship over time. Cenarius had high hopes for this new intelligent race. He believed that as long as he gave them the right guidance, these Night Elves would become the guardians of nature in the future and protect this beautiful land alongside him. Therefore, under the careful guidance of Cenarius, the Night Elves began to learn the ways of nature and druidism. Under the guidance of Cenarius, some Night Elves began to explore and understand the ways of nature. They learned how to communicate with nature and harness its power to maintain balance and harmony. This marked the origin of the Druid sect. During the years when the Night Elves delved deeply into the ways of nature, one name gradually stood out among the many scholars: Malfurion Stormrage. This young Night Elf was Tyrande's childhood sweetheart. With his extraordinary talent and love for nature, he won the favor of the forest demigod Cenarius and became his disciple under Cenarius's personal guidance. He was also known as the first mortal druid. Cenarius had high hopes for Malfurion. He not only taught him the skills of a druid, but also imparted the wisdom of living in harmony with nature. Under the careful guidance of his mentor, Malfurion grew rapidly, and his name began to spread among the Night Elves, becoming a symbol of the way of nature. However, while the way of druidry gradually spread among the Night Elves, Queen Azshara's fanatical worship and exploration of the Well of Eternity caused Cenarius deep concern. As a powerful wilderness demigod who had existed since ancient times, Cenarius had a profound understanding of the instability of arcane energy. He worried that the Night Elf leader's relentless pursuit of power would eventually lead to irreversible disaster. To curb the spread of arcane worship in Night Elf society, Cenarius decided to have Malfurion further promote the ideas of the Druid sect. In this way, he hoped to guide the Night Elves back to nature and help them regain their respect for it. After defeating the Troll Empire, the Night Elf Empire, under the rule of Queen Azshara, reached an unprecedented heyday. The prosperity of the 6 major cities and the Queen's prestige filled the people with expectations for the future. However, in this vast territory, there was one place that Queen Azshara was unwilling and dared not easily set foot in, Mount Hyjal, where many powerful wilderness demigods resided. Although Queen Azshara held disdain for the wild forest and the demigods dwelling there, she still ordered that the people of the tribe were prohibited from setting foot on this sacred land at will, in order to maintain the ancient tradition of the Night Elves being close to nature. This ban protected the tranquility and harmony of Mount Hyjal to a certain extent and provided a relatively independent development space for the Druid sect. Pictured is Tyrande. Chapter 6 and 47, Ethan's Disguise. In the Empire of Dark Night, the Druid's way is regarded as a noble and people-friendly path. What makes it unique is that it does not involve the realm of arcane magic. This feature makes the Druids particularly unique and eye-catching in this empire, built on the Well of Eternity and arcane magic. The prosperity of the Dark Knight Empire is closely related to the Well of Eternity. It is the immense energy contained in the water of this mysterious well that gave birth to the rise of the Empire and enabled the widespread application of arcane magic. However, this overwhelming power also leads to nightmares beyond the world. The Upper Elves who mastered magic, under the leadership of Queen Azshara, turned to the devil one after another out of their desire and pursuit of power. This incident led to the general hostility of the lower elves towards magic, causing them to doubt and reject this power that was once regarded as a norm. At the same time, their affinity for the Druids grew day by day. Druids are guided by the way of nature and live in harmony with it. This philosophy of life has resonated widely among the lower elves. This is why Ethan chose to use druid spells instead of arcane magic to fight back when facing the Doomguard. In this world, the rash use of magic can easily arouse the disgust and vigilance of others. The druid identity acts like a good guy certification, making people naturally trust and favor him. On the other hand, when first arriving in the new world, it was somewhat inconvenient to use arcane magic. If the source of power for druid spells is the invocation of nature, then the power of arcane magic comes from the manipulation of magical rules. This leads to the fact that where there is nature, druid spells can take effect, but where the laws are different, the effects of arcane magic will vary. When using dragon transformation, Ethan was surprised to find that the magical rules differ from world to world. Forcibly using magic will only achieve twice the result with half the effort. This is because his dragon transformation originated from Onik. Shia is the case of Honda's spell in this world. Ethan realized that he needed to spend time analyzing the unique magical rules of this world in order to use his spells more smoothly. In comparison, the use of druid spells seems simple and direct. As long as he is recognized by nature, he can draw on the powerful and wild natural forces of this world. And perhaps it's because the natural forces in this world are more primitive and wild. The natural forces in this world are much more powerful and wild than those in the Harry Potter world. Using the same spell, the effect is much stronger. While Tyrande was describing the current situation of the Dark Knight Empire in detail to Ethan, suddenly, another fierce cry of battle broke through the tranquility of the air, interrupting her thoughts. She suddenly turned her head and looked around, and saw not far away a group of ferocious demons rushing towards the battlefield, leaving chaos wherever they passed. "Come with me," Tyrande said urgently, holding Ethan's wrist tightly, turning around and galloping away in the other direction. Her face was full of anxiety and determination. "We must deal with them, and we must not let the devils notice our whereabouts. Otherwise, the consequences will be disastrous." Ethan immediately agreed, followed closely, and the two of them moved quickly and soon came near the demons. Ethan used the druid spells without hesitation and fought side by side with Tyrande to clean up the nearby demons. Their cooperation was perfect. Ethan used druid spells to summon thorns and vines to control the demons. Tyrande wielded weapons, using bows and arrows from a distance and blades at close range, and quickly defeated the group of demons. After the battle, Ethan used druid spells to bury Tyrande's comrades who died heroically and the sisters of the Sisterhood of Elune. He gently brushed each body so that they could rest in peace. This scene deepened. I touched Tyrande's heart, and her gratitude and affection for Ethan arose spontaneously. Next, Tyrande revealed her purpose. She told Ethan that her trip was to perform an important mission. Ethan stepped forward without hesitation and offered to escort her along. At this time, Tyrande had not yet transformed into the powerful and heroic high priest of the Night Elves she would become in the future, but she already exuded a unique temperament. Every move revealed an indescribable quality of heroic spirit and grace. Ethan looked at the young night elf girl and couldn't help but have an idea in his mind. As a time traveler, Ethan had no friends in this strange world, and rashly stepping into the main battlefield of the ancient war was undoubtedly asking for trouble. After all, Tyrande is one of the important figures in the history of Warcraft. Even if she was just emerging in the Resistance, she was the one chosen by Elune. She would definitely become the leader of the Night Elves in the future. Therefore, she was undoubtedly the best choice for Ethan to align himself with the influential figures among the Night Elves. In short, Ethan saw a possibility in Tyrande. By following her, he could integrate into the world faster and find his own place. Perhaps it was Ethan's druid status and the unique charm he displayed that won Tyrande's favor and trust. Perhaps Tyrande really needed manpower to complete this arduous task. In any case, after a short period of thinking, she readily agreed to Ethan's request. So Ethan followed Tyrande on an unknown journey. The two walked along, chatting as they went. Ethan relied on his outstanding appearance and charm to easily extract a series of information from Tyrande. This innocent night elf girl, who was hundreds of years old, seemed to have no defense against Ethan. Her words were full of sincerity and enthusiasm, as if she wanted to share all her secrets with Ethan, even if it meant recounting her family history. During their conversation, Ethan gradually learned about Tyrande's life and background, her family, her upbringing, her dreams, and pursuits. In the ancient Kaldori city of Suramar, Tyrande Whisperwind and the night elf twin brothers, Malfurion and Illidan Stormrage, spent their childhood together. This city was not only the cradle of their growth, but also the witness of their friendship. Tyrande was born into a warm and ordinary civilian family. Although her family background could not be compared with those of the upper elf magisters in Suramar, who lived luxurious lives and possessed powerful magic, under the protection of the prosperity of the Dark Knight Empire, even ordinary people could live a stable and prosperous life. She, Malfurion, and Illidan had been inseparable since childhood, like brothers and sisters. They often traveled through dense forests together, competing in running speed and learning hunting skills. Among them, Tyrande was always slightly better. Not only was she agile, but she also had a deep love for nature. She especially liked to look up at the sky and was deeply in awe of the bright moon. Whenever night fell, she would stare at the moon, as if communicating with it. As time passed, Tyrande gradually matured into a graceful young woman. Her beauty and intelligence coexisted, attracting everyone. Malfurion and Illidan also grew rapidly during this period, and the friendship between the three of them became deeper and deeper. They encouraged each other to find their own calling in life. The moon goddess Elune was the supreme deity in the hearts of all night elves. It was under her guidance that the night elves learned that the continent they lived on was called Kalimdor. In Titan language, this name means the land of eternal starlight. This divine revelation allowed the night elves to find their roots in soul. They proudly called themselves Kaldori, which means children of the stars. For thousands of years, the night elves' faith in Elune had been unwavering. The faith in Elune has been as firm as a rock, penetrating every corner of the Empor. Even the powerful Queen Azshara does not dare to challenge the authority of the ear god lightly. To show her piety and respect for Elune, Queen Azshara personally ordered the construction of a magnificent temple near the coast of the northwest continent, Lhasa Dunja. This temple towers into the clouds, as intimidating as a throne in the sky. The completion of Lhasa Dunja was not just the birth of a building, it became a gathering place for the night elves' faith. Since then, the focus of the Sisters of Elune's work has gradually shifted to this new temple city. Night elves from all over the empire embarked on pilgrimages, traveling by foot, bicycle, or even by hippogriff to study and pray. In the palace of Lhasa Dunja, the air is filled with the scent of various sacrificial spices, and prayers echo through the halls. The square outside the palace is bustling with activity. Vendors sell various souvenirs and sacrifices, and tourists flock to visit the sacred city. In Tehran's young heart, she had a dream early on. She longed to become a moon priestess and bring peace and prosperity to the night elves. This dream was like a seed, taking root and sprouting in her heart. As the years went by, it grew stronger and stronger. Finally, after Tyrande grew up a little, she had the opportunity to realize her dream. With infinite expectations for the future, she embarked on a study trip to Lhasa Dunja. In this holy land of moon belief, she studied with great concentration, worked hard to improve herself, and continued to fight for the dreams in her heart. After completing her studies, Tyrande returned to her hometown of Suramar. In the Temple of Elune in her hometown, she found inner peace and strength, successfully becoming the new priestess of the Sisterhood of Elune. At the same time, under the protection of the demigod Cenarius, Malfurion studied the ways of the druid in depth and gradually mastered the power of nature. However, Illidan struggled to find his own path. He was passionate about arcana, but found it challenging, searching for his own destiny. Like his brother, he developed a deep infatuation for Tyrande after the budding of adolescence, even more so than his brother. However, this emotion was never noticed by Malfurion. Chapter 648, The Battle of the Ancients. Originally, Tyrande thought that such a peaceful time would last forever, and that she would live as an ordinary moon priest. She envisioned a future where she would choose one of the Stormrage brothers to be her partner, build a family, and have several children. However, she never anticipated that the ancient war would break out and change her fate forever. A large number of alien creatures suddenly emerged from the portal in Suramar City. These demonic beings swept through the Valshara forest like a scourge, turning the once peaceful home into a purgatory on Earth. Countless night elf civilians lost their lives due to the brutal invasion of demons, and Tyrande's home was not spared. She witnessed the death of her relatives with her own eyes, and her heart was filled with pain and helplessness. The demons' rampage was as fierce and ruthless as a storm, destroying everything in sight without mercy. Tyrande's hometown seemed so fragile in the face of this evil force and was instantly reduced to ruins. All her family members, those relatives who had laughed and cried with her, were killed in that catastrophe, leaving her with only endless grief and hatred. The pain those demons brought to her was so profound that she could not forget the tragic death of her family. Whenever night falls, she dreams of those terrible scenes, the ferocious faces of demons, the helpless cries of her family, and her own helpless anger. These memories stabbed her heart like sharp knives, making it impossible for her to let go. Hatred and anger became Tyrande's driving force. She was no longer the girl who simply pursued her dream of being a moon priest, but had transformed into a brave warrior, vowing to avenge her family and home. Along with other priestesses, she healed the wounded in the ruins of Suramar and transformed the Temple of Elune into a sanctuary. They worked day and night, using their faith and strength to bring hope and healing to the wounded, becoming a solid backing for the resistance. This time, Tyrande shouldered the heavy responsibility of the sisters and went to La Salraza to seek to liberate the Sisters of Elune there. The real main force of the Sisters of Elune was stationed there, and even their high priest stayed there. Unfortunately, they were put under house arrest by the Upper Elf Gate and did not understand the outside world. Her purpose was to bring the Sisters of Elune back to Suramar, adding a new force to the resistance. Ethan opened his eyes suddenly, and his vision was swallowed up by a deep and endless darkness. In this strange realm, where time and space are elusive, he felt an inexplicable confusion and trance intertwined in his heart. He looked around and found that in the entire dark space, only a fist-sized light source was vaguely revealed in the west direction. The warm and bright silver light was like the twinkling of distant stars, shining from an unknown distance. However, these lights seemed unable to touch his body and could only bloom alone in the darkness. Ethan tried to move towards the distant light in this weightless space. His movements were clumsy and difficult, as if he was groping forward in endless darkness. However, no matter how hard he tried to get closer, the light source always kept an insurmountable distance from him, as if it was an endless chase. Suddenly, Ethan's consciousness fell into a trance, and he felt as if he had passed through the barrier of time and space and returned to the real world. He sat up from the ground with a pale face and found that he was in a peaceful forest. Recalling the dream he just experienced, Ethan felt lingering fear. He wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and subconsciously turned his head to look to the west. That direction was exactly where the light source was in his dream. "It's this dream again," Ethan murmured to himself. "What exactly is this foreshadowing to me?" As a psychic who is well versed in the mysteries of the soul, Ethan has almost absolute control over his inner world. Ethan believed that his mental barrier, as solid as iron, had no cracks for no reason, allowing dreams like this to creep in. The reason for such a dream must be due to some powerful external influence. However, it is not easy to influence the mind of a psychic, at least it is impossible for those lonely ghosts wandering the world. The existence that can achieve this is more accomplished than Ethan in this area, so it may only be a high-ranking existence that has reached the legendary level or even surpassed it. The continent of Azeroth has never lacked such powerful beings. Not to mention the demigods of the wilderness who are closely connected to the souls of Azeroth. The moon god Elune, whom the night elves have believed in for countless years, is a powerful entity at the level of a true god. Gods like to make mysterious revelations like this. Ethan frowned and thought, and suddenly an idea flashed. In terms of the west, I remember it is the direction of La Salra, the seat of the sky, right? In previous conversations, Tyrande revealed a lot of valuable information to Ethan, including their current geographical location and the latest developments in the War of the Ancients. After successfully resisting the fierce initial demonic attack, resistance forces sprung up across the Dark Knight Empire, led by Black Crow Castle, which successfully defeated a demonic attack on the battlefield. Originally, Tyrande stayed in the captured Suramar to provide healing and logistics to the resistance. When the Night Elf rebels led by Lord Kurtalos Ravencrest of Black Crow Keep arrived in Suramar, the Moon Priestess decided to go into battle. For strategic reasons, Suramar was abandoned, and the remaining soldiers and civilians gathered under the banner of Kurtalos. Tyrande left with the army, and many civilians joined her. However, the battle situation only changed from a one-sided massacre to a slightly relieved stalemate. These were still the vanguard of the Burning Legion. Subsequent demonic armies would swarm in from the portal at any time to launch a large-scale attack. After the initial defeat, the demons stepped up their offensive against the Dark Knight Empire. One of their leaders, Sargeras's right-hand man, the Defiler Archimonde, personally organized the offensive. In order to fully resist the power of demons, the rebels realized that they needed to find powerful allies. Since almost all the highborn elves who had mastered the power of magic surrendered to the enemy, the resistance had no choice but to focus on the Sisters of Elune, who represented their faith, and the Fat God of the Wilds, who represented the Emperor of Nature. Malfurion volunteered to seek help from the forest demigod Cenarius, and then went to Mount Hyjal with Cenarius to seek help from the unruly demigods of the wilderness. The early stages of the call for help went surprisingly smoothly. Under the leadership of Cenarius, this team of elite soldiers bravely passed through the demon-infested battlefield near the capital, overcoming obstacles all the way, and finally arrived at the foot of Mount Hyjal successfully. However, it is not easy to convince those demigods of the wild who are used to being free to fight side by side. Just when they were at a deadlock, the demons of the Burning Legion suddenly launched a fierce attack on Mount Hyjal, taking the initiative to help them persuade the demigods. This sudden battle broke the deadlock and made the hesitant demigods realize the seriousness of the situation. Both the demigods and the aspect dragon have decided to join the battle, and they are gathering near the capital Zin Ashari. Ethan touched his chin and said thoughtfully, "It seems that the War of the Ancients has passed the time of being passively beaten. The difficult period has entered a stalemate stage. Now, the Night Elves only need to wait for those powerful reinforcements to be assembled before they can launch a decisive charge. If I remember correctly, there were some heartbreaking incidents during the days when reinforcements were being gathered. Various betrayals and alliances were formed. For instance, a younger brother, spying on his brother-in-law, betrayed his own people and joined the dark embrace of the Burning Legion, becoming the first-generation demon hunter. Additionally, Onyxia, the king of black dragons and the guardian of the earth, was betrayed by her father, the future Deathwing. He exploited the immense pressure of the Burning Legion's invasion to cleverly encourage the guardian dragons to collaborate in creating an extremely powerful artifact, the Dragon Soul. However, instead of using this artifact to annihilate the demons as promised, he turned it against his own kin. The Blue Dragon tribe, caught off guard by this sudden betrayal, faced a dire crisis of genocide. Ethan shook his head, dispelling these chaotic thoughts. "Forget it, that's not what I should be concerned about now," he muttered to himself. During the days when Cenarius was negotiating with the wild demigods, trying to persuade them to join the cause, Tyrande also stepped up. She volunteered to lead a group of troops to the holy place of Elun's faith, the throne of the sky, Las Raza. Their mission was to contact the power of the sisters to establish a close connection with Black Crow Castle, the main force of the resistance. More importantly, they needed to attempt to free the sisters of Elun who were imprisoned by the Upper Elves. However, fate does not always favor the righteous. Just as Tyrande and her team embarked on their journey with enthusiasm and hope, events took an unexpected turn. Somehow, the news had been leaked, and the shadow of the devil quietly fell upon them. An elite ambush was laid on the road the special envoy had to pass. The sudden attack shattered the tranquility of the air. The roar of demons, the clash of weapons, and the shouts of soldiers intertwined to form a tragic war song. Tyrande and her team suffered heavy losses under the relentless assault of the demon army, and the team was completely scattered. Just when Tyrande was about to fall into despair, her life hanging by a thread, a majestic, wild hippogriff descended from the sky. It fluttered its wings and rescued Tyrande from the clutches of the demons. This hippogriff was a companion she had unexpectedly acquired before setting off. Fortunately, she had brought the hippogriff on this trip instead of her signature white tiger, Ash, the saber she had raised since childhood. If not for this, the future leader of the Night Elves would have met her end as soon as she debuted. Then, Tyrande saw Ethan fighting with the remaining demon soldiers. She took action in time, and together they eliminated the demons left to clean up the battlefield. Chapter 649, Ethan's Dream. Ethan? Tyrande's voice sounded, tinged with concern and doubt. Feeling the slight movement beside her, she subconsciously rubbed her sleepy eyes and poked her head out of the makeshift tent. The sun shone through the sparse clouds, casting a hazy golden veil over the camp. "Have you had the same nightmare again?" she asked. "Yes, it's that dream again." Ethan's face looked a little pale, and he nodded with a wry smile. "Sorry, I woke you up." Tyrande shook her head gently. "It's okay, I wasn't sleeping deeply." She patted her cheeks with both hands, trying to dispel the remaining sleepiness and clear her thoughts. As an experienced moon priestess, she knew that dreams could sometimes reveal deep secrets or foretell clues about the future. Many of Elune's oracles appeared in the form of dreams. "You should tell me about that dream. You said that the only light in that darkness comes from the west. Is this a sign of something?" Ethan was silent for a moment, then slowly said, "I think so too. That dream is too real, and I feel an inexplicable sense of oppression every time I wake up. I guess this may be some kind of supernatural force trying to warn or remind me of something. However, I can't be sure who the other party is, and I can't figure out why they use dreams to hint at me twice." Ethan actually had a bold guess in his mind, but he didn't tell Tyrande directly. Tyrande didn't know that the person in front of her was not a real night elf druid, but a human from another world. He had hitched a ride with the Bronze Dragon King Nozdormu, the Guardian of Time, and was able to come to the world of Azeroth during the War of the Ancients. His existence was undoubtedly a huge secret to the residents of this world. However, Ethan wouldn't be surprised if someone discovered his origins. In the vast land of Azeroth, if anyone could really detect his existence, it would be two extremely powerful beings, the Bronze Dragon King Nozdormu and the true god Elune, worshipped by the Night Elves. What's more, Tyrande Whisperwind, who was now with him day and night, was Elune's most favored in this world. This beautiful and powerful priestess of the moon god was deeply loved by Elune. So much so, that at some point in the future, when Tyrande was captured by a demon, the goddess even personally came to protect her and prevent her from facing a miserable fate, so it was normal for him to stay with her every day and attract Elune's attention. At this time, Tyrande tied her loose blue-green hair back into two braids, raised her eyes to the west of the forest, and said thoughtfully, "Our west, Lasal Raza? Are the answers we're looking for hidden there?" Ethan followed her gaze and saw the setting sun gradually descending over the mountain. The afterglow on the horizon reflected on Tyrande's face, making her light purple skin appear crimson, enhancing her beauty. He stood up and began to clean up the camp, saying, "Yes, even if we are to continue the mission, we must get to Lasal Raza as soon as possible. I have a hunch that all the mysteries will be revealed in that temple city." Night elves have completely different living habits from humans. They prefer the night blessed by Elune to the day. When the sun shines over the earth and everything wakes up, they choose to immerse themselves in peaceful dreams. And when night falls, the silver moon hangs high, and frost flowers decorate the earth, they begin to truly become active. Ethan now had the body of a night elf, and his physiological functions had changed accordingly. Whenever night fell, his spirit couldn't help but get excited, but his heart was still human after all, with that deep-rooted habit of waking at sunrise and resting at sunset deeply imprinted on his every move. Therefore, it took him several days to gradually adapt to this completely different lifestyle. However, the Night Elves' work and rest habits had unexpectedly brought them benefits. Before arriving in Azeroth, Ethan thought that demons were tireless beings, ever needing sleep and always maintaining strong fighting power. However, he soon realized this was a misunderstanding. Blizzard, the game developer, simply chose not to depict scenes where demons sleep or act lazily. In reality, demons need rest just like mortal races. Although their physiology lacks an obvious circadian rhythm, most demons rest similarly to mortal races, unlike the Night Elves. This provided valuable opportunities for Ethan and Tyrande. When night falls, they can use the racial characteristics of the Night Elves to become more stealthy and agile. This characteristic of Night Elves is even reflected in the game, where they possess a natural ability called Shadow Escape. This ability allows them to move like fish in water at night, shuttling between enemy formations more freely. Ethan and Tyrande carefully avoided the patrols arranged by the demons at night. Relying on Ethan's extraordinary perception and his superb druid spells, they managed to pass through the Burning Legion's blockade time and time again. When Ethan and Tyrande stepped into Lasalza's control, they immediately noticed changes in their surrounding environment. The number of demons that were originally scattered around began to decrease significantly until they gradually disappeared without a trace. They were replaced by a group of extraordinary and powerful moon guards. These elite battle mages, arranged by the upper elves, enforced martial law throughout the city. The Moon Guards wore gorgeous armor inlaid with arcane runes, wielding staffs and swords that sparkled with magical light, exuding an aura that could not be underestimated. As the most important military force of the Upper Elves, they were usually deployed in key areas of major cities, responsible for defense and security. They not only had excellent combat capabilities, but also rich combat experience, making them a presence that no enemy could ignore. A certain bratty brother who spied on his brother-in-law and future betrayer was once a member of the Moon Guard. As they approached the outskirts of the Sky Seat metropolitan area, Ethan felt the call in his dream become clearer and stronger. As a temple city built by Queen Ashara to show respect to the moon goddess Elune, Ras Al Raza must hide secrets and power related to Elune. Considering this, Ethan became more and more certain that the call seemed to come from the moon goddess Elune herself, or some kind of power closely connected with her. Thinking of this, Ethan squinted his eyes and stared at the city high on the mountain plateau, Ras Al Raza. His golden eyes shone mysteriously in the sun, and he thought silently, "Is it you, Elune, the moon goddess?" A mysterious legend has been circulating among the night elves for an unknown period. The legend says that those with golden eyes are destined to achieve great things in the future. This statement was widely circulated among the night elves and became a well-known prophecy. Most night elves have green, blue, or silver eyes, and very few have golden eyes, so this rumor has a broad foundation. After Ethan learned about this legend, he was deeply curious about it. He searched the memories of the night elves, trying to find those legendary figures with golden eyes. However, he found that only 2 people in the entire night elf history had such characteristics. One of them is Ashara, the contemporary queen who rules the entire Dark Knight Empire, and the other is one of Tyrann's childhood sweethearts, Illidan Stormrage. Both of them are key figures in determining the history of the Night Elves, and the prophecy of achieving great things holds true. However, both of them later turned to Sargeras. Although Illidan had other motives, this result made the way this prophecy was realized darkly humorous. When Tyrande told Ethan that he also had the legendary golden eyes that could achieve great things, he couldn't help but feel a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Ethan didn't feel any fluctuation in his heart. Instead, he wanted to laugh a little. When Tyrande told him that he also had the legendary golden eyes that could achieve great things, Ethan's heart did not waver much. On the contrary, he even wanted to laugh. He knew that the reason he had these golden eyes was not due to some mysterious fate, but the result of his special adjustment when using the dragon transformation technique. The dragon transformation technique is a powerful magic that allows the user to transform into various forms. Although Ethan cannot actively determine his appearance, a skilled spellcaster can make some fine-tuning during the first transformation. It was because Ethan had heard this legend that he specifically installed a pair of golden eyes for himself. Ethan had already made plans in his mind. One of the reasons he took the initiative to embark on the journey to Ras Al Raza with Tyrande was to pursue and confirm the mysterious call from Elune. In this era, magic was monopolized by the upper elves, and most of the power of the resistance came from ordinary night elf people. However, among these people, 2 forces were particularly prominent. One was the Druids, who were favored by the demigods of the wilderness, and the other was the moon god priests, who had carried the beliefs of the night elves for thousands of years. As the rebels fought side by side with the demigods of the wilderness in the process of resisting the demons, the reputation of the Druids was demonstrated, and they became an important force in resisting the demons. The moon god priests relied on the people's deep feelings for traditional beliefs to occupy a pivotal position in the resistance. Therefore, compared to the Druids, the lunar faith had a wider influence on today's night elf resistance. Ethan knew this very well. He understood that if he could gain Elune's approval, then he, an outsider and a border bumpkin in the eyes of the night elves, would be able to rise to the top and become an important figure in the resistance. Such an opportunity was a once-in-a-lifetime chance for him, and he was determined to seize it. Chapter 650, Ras Al Raza. As a mage whose strength is almost legendary, Ethan Lestrange is not overly worried about his survival in the War of the Ancients. He is very confident in himself. Even in this chaotic era, no matter how dire the situation, he can always find a place to live in peace. He is not a prominent figure among the Night Elves anyway, so even the powerful Burning Legion is unlikely to pursue him. Looking back at the history of World of Warcraft, the War of the Ancients ultimately ended with the victory of the Night Elves. This fact also makes Ethan not worry too much about the future. He does not believe that demons will eventually rule the world, so after experiencing the initial nervousness and uneasiness when he first arrived, he gradually calmed down and began to think about how to seek greater benefits in this world. For example, the magic of this world, the druid skills of the Night Elves, and various rare treasures have all become tempting targets in Ethan's eyes. What moved him even more was the real purpose of the demon's invasion of Azeroth, the treasure that represented endless magical energy, the holy object in the eyes of mages, the Well of Eternity. However, to pursue these interests, Ethan first needs to gain a certain status in the Night Elf resistance. In the world of Harry Potter, he has become one of the influential figures in the magical world of the United Kingdom. In the process of gradually mastering the magical world there, Ethan's understanding of power and influence deepened. He knew that only by standing at a high enough position could he have access to the core secrets of this world and have the opportunity to get his hands on those coveted powers and treasures. Therefore, he specially created golden eyes for himself, hoping to stand out among the Night Elves. At the same time, he was also full of curiosity and expectation about the call from Elune, thinking that this might be an excellent opportunity to improve his status. While in the world of Azeroth, Ethan is always thinking about the world of Harry Potter. Although he is also a time traveler to the Harry Potter world, he has lived there for a long time, and the foundations he has built over the decades are all there. Of course, he cannot stay in Azeroth permanently and will one day go back. However, how to return became a problem before him. During his time travel, the Book of Knowledge that caused all this to happen dissipated in the air like fireworks after releasing all its power, making him sigh. Fortunately, Ethan had already memorized the techniques in the book during his time travel. During his journey outside the world, Ethan continued to understand new laws and gradually deepened his understanding of these time travel techniques. As long as he is given enough resources and time, he believes that he will be able to reproduce the magical power of the Book of Knowledge. The only thing that needs to be considered is where the powerful energy source needed to travel comes from. At least Ethan wouldn't consider providing it himself. He couldn't help but cast his eyes on the source of trouble in the ancient war, the Well of Eternity. The well water contains endless magical energy, which is the best source of energy for him to travel through. In addition to thinking about how to return, Ethan also began to plan for future interests. The War of the Ancients was the first planet-level crisis that Azeroth encountered since it had mortal civilization, but it was not the last. Azeroth is the home planet of Jaina and Onyxia, and they will eventually return here. He hopes that when that day comes, he can do something for them. Now, in the age of the War of the Ancients, Ethan realizes that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. In this era, he can make allies, accumulate strength, explore secrets, and lay a solid foundation for the future world. Sense of reason. They are not completely closed off from the outside world. Ethan knew that if he wanted to gain access to the Well of Eternity, he would need to leverage his unique knowledge and abilities to earn their trust or find a way to bypass their defenses. After Tehran's narration, Ethan roughly understood the abilities of druids in this era. The druid profession was like the rising sun just emerging in Night Elf society. They drew strength from the spirits of the wilderness and became beings closely connected to nature. However, since this power had just been mastered, the Night Elves were still in the early stages of learning how to use it effectively. Their methods retained more of the rough and primitive style of the wild demigods. As the incarnation of the will of nature, the demigods of the wilderness were born with awe-inspiring power without the need for deliberate practice. they could manipulate the power of nature at will and use its energy for their own purposes. If mortals wanted to master the power of nature, they had to explore more subtle and efficient application techniques through unremitting research and practice. Specifically, this meant abandoning crude methods and creating specific spells through fixed routines and combinations. Compared with the druids in this world, the druid spells mastered by Ethan were undoubtedly more mature and advanced. Not only could he flexibly use the power of nature, but he could also use the combination and changes of spells to exert one force into multiple parts, producing more diverse effects. This in-depth understanding and skillful use of magic enabled him to face various challenges with ease. As a time traveler, Ethan was not only a mage, but also a druid. Coupled with his understanding of the history of Azeroth, he knew the advantages and disadvantages of the power of nature. Ethan believed that among the 6 major power systems of Azeroth, the power of nature originated from the will of nature and the spirit of the wilderness. It was characterized by being stable and controllable, like a warm spring that stretched endlessly. However, stability often meant that the rate of enhancement was too slow. Although the power of nature was one of the 6 original powers of the universe, compared with other powers that had the ability to destroy heaven and earth, such as arcane magic and fell energy, its output performance was always slightly inferior. For example, the famous druid Malfurion achieved the feat of detonating the Well of Eternity in the future, but he did this not with the power of a druid, but with the help of Illidan's stolen dragon soul. In the second defeat of the Burning Legion's invasion, Malfurion successfully killed Archimonde, but this was not the result of druidic power. It was the sacrifice of countless ancient spirits. Even more shameful was that the demigod Cenarius, the source of druidic power, would be easily killed by a mortal in the future. The Green Dragon clan, which also controlled the power of nature, was easily controlled by Xavius in the Emerald Nightmare. Even the noble Queen Ysera was not spared. These events made Ethan doubt the power of druids. He had doubts, at least on this path. He couldn't see any bright future. The power of a druid might win him a place in this world, but if he wanted to truly seek a powerful path, he needed to find other sources of power. His gaze naturally fell on the Well of Eternity. The Moon Guard's defense of the Sky Throne was like an iron wall. Ethan and Tyrande, both night elves, knew very well that trying to sneak into this floating city with shadow escape, as they did to penetrate the demonic defense line, was tantamount to a daydream. They had to find another way to enter La Salle Raza. Fortunately, although these upper elf mages were arrogant, they at least still retained a sense of reason. They were not completely closed off from the outside world. Ethan knew that if he wanted to gain access to the Well of Eternity, he would need to leverage his unique knowledge and abilities to earn their trust or find a way to bypass their defenses. The defenders blocked Ras Al Raza, but they were confused by Queen Ashara's order. There was no evidence that they were He also involved in colluding with demons, so they would not kill their own people easily. This provided a glimmer of opportunity for Ethan and Tyrande. Considering the complexity of the current situation, Ethan felt that he must proceed with caution. Many upper elves had abandoned their original beliefs and followed Queen Ashara into the arms of the devil. The defenders here were inevitably bound to have such spies. In this situation, they could not easily judge who was friend or foe, so Ethan strongly advised Tyrande to hide her true purpose. Along the way, in Tyrande's eyes, Ethan was not only powerful but also full of wisdom, a reliable companion. Tyrande, who was still very young at this time, followed Ethan's advice. She agreed with his suggestion and noticed his performance. She felt that Ethan was not only powerful but also smart. He was worthy of being a man who had traveled thousands of miles at a young age, and he was a trustworthy partner. Although she was also a gifted priest and warrior, she felt that she was still too young and had too little experience in this area, so she wisely chose to follow Ethan's arrangements. Since she wanted to conceal her identity, Tyrande took off her eye-catching leather armor and put on ordinary civilian clothing. Ethan carefully untied her ponytail and braided it into a simple braid with his own hands, making her look more like an ordinary village girl. Afterwards, The two of them hid the hippogriff properly and approached the floating city of Ras Al Raza on foot. They walked steadily and looked natural, as if they were just two ordinary pilgrims coming to visit this religious capital. Chapter 651, Breaking Through the Defense Line. Just after they reached the foot of the mountain, as expected, they were blocked by several moon guards wearing enchanted light armor. The staffs in their hands flashed with cold light, ready to attack at any moment. "Stop!" The leader of the team shouted sharply, his eyes darting between Ethan and Tyrande. "Who are you? Why are you here in Ras Al Raza?" Ethan frowned slightly, but remained silent. His character was that of a country bumpkin from the border, lacking experience in negotiating with the upper elves. Tyrande took the initiative to step forward and speak to the guards. "Dear Moon Guard," Tyrande said in a humble and pious tone, "we are pilgrims from the forest of Ashenvale in the south, traveling long distances just to pray to the great goddess Elune in the Great Temple. We hope she will bless us with favorable weather and protect our home from disasters." The team leader raised his eyebrows slightly, a look of confusion and disdain flashing in his eyes. He scrutinized Ethan and Tyrande as if judging the authenticity of their words. "Ashenvale Forest? Pray?" the team leader repeated, a hint of playfulness in his tone. Although I personally don't think prayer can help our current situation, but since you are so pious, I'll let you pass." He waved his hand, signaling the moon guards to step aside. However, their eyes and the sarcastic smiles on their faces revealed their contempt for Ethan and Tyrande. One of the moon guards slowly moved aside, raised his staff, and waved it back slightly. As a blue arcane light flashed, a winding mountain road slowly unfolded before them. It spiraled upwards, leading directly to the mountaintop city. The team leader turned around and walked towards Ethan, gently pressing his back with the tail of his staff. Let's go! Don't expect us to activate the teleportation array for you two civilians. Just climb this mountain road honestly." Ethan looked up helplessly. Although the mountain road was wide and flat enough for 4 carriages to pass side by side, it was also dauntingly winding. According to the intelligence previously provided by Tyrande, this mountain road was originally a passage for caravans and large-scale armies. Ordinary people could directly reach the temple square of the Unleashed Throne through the teleportation array. However, they obviously did not have such privileges now. Tyrande was furious, ready to rush towards the mocking moon guards, but Ethan grabbed her wrist tightly. "Wait, Tyrande." Ethan's deep voice reached Tyrande's angry heart. He shook his head slightly, leaned over her long purple ears, and whispered, "Don't be impulsive. Our mission is the most important." Ethan's breath gently blew against Tyrande's ears, causing her to tremble involuntarily. She turned her head and met Ethan's deep gaze, and the anger in her heart gradually calmed down. Thinking of the moment when Ethan gently braided her hair, a faint blush appeared on her face, like dewdrops on violet petals. Okay, I'll listen to you." Tyrande took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in her heart. As the two began to obediently climb the winding mountain road, the faces of the moon guards showed a sense of triumph. They gathered together to whisper, occasionally bursting into piercing laughter. "Look, these commoners are really self-aware. They know they are not worthy to be compared with our noble high elves, so they can only climb the mountain road obediently." "That's right. Lord God Envoy will definitely lead us to rebuild the glory of the Dark Knight Empire, and let these mud-legged people understand their own insignificance and humility." Tyrande clenched her hands, her knuckles turning white. Anger flashed in her eyes, threatening to burst out at any moment. If Ethan hadn't been holding her hand tightly, providing strength and comfort, the night elf girl might not have been able to endure the provocation of those moon guards. "These upper-class bastards," she said through gritted teeth. "Since the invasion of demons, their arrogance has only worsened. I didn't expect even the moon guards, who once held their own identities, to become like this." Ethan turned his head and glanced at the chattering moon guards behind him, a contemptuous smile flashing across his face. "Let them enjoy their moment," Ethan whispered. "I hope they realize the true purpose of the so-called God's messenger soon enough." Ethan was never one to retaliate with kindness. He knew his goals and mission clearly, and always took revenge on those who offended him. But he also understood the importance of remaining sober and calm in critical situations. In front of the moon guards, he winked at Tyrande, and the moon priestess nodded. Whoosh! Tyrande suddenly let out a series of crisp, sharp whistles, echoing through the silent mountain forest. This unique whistle was the secret signal between her and her hippogriff. The hippogriff, hiding in the nearby dense woods, immediately responded to its owner's call. Its strong wings flapped powerfully, creating a burst of violent airflow, and it quickly flew towards the mountain road. The sudden appearance of the hippogriff broke the surrounding tranquility and alerted the moon guards, who had previously looked down upon Ethan and Tyrande. They eyed the huge flying creature with vigilance, subconsciously clenching their weapons and adopting defensive postures, ready to deal with any potential conflict. However, Ethan and Tyrande ignored them and climbed onto the hippogriff's back, one after another. I won't bother you all to see us off. Continue to stand guard, fellow watchdogs, Ethan taunted. These words were like a match, instantly igniting the anger in the hearts of the moon guards. Their eyes became fierce and angry, as if they wanted to devour Ethan and Tyrande alive. However, they could only watch helplessly as the hippogriff took the two of them into the sky, flying towards the distant Lazalaza. Ha! Ha! Ethan hummed happily, his eyes full of expectation and curiosity as he looked at the approaching Lazalaza. Tyrande also turned her head to look at the moon guards, who were becoming smaller and smaller in the distance, a subtle hint of joy on her face. This was the first time she had treated the highborn in such a manner, and this new experience made her feel both excited and a little uneasy. In the past few years, Tyrande had been living as a civilian. The education she received since childhood taught her to treat the upper elves with awe and respect. However, today she had acted rudely, filling her heart with contradictions. When she saw the angry and helpless expressions of those moon guards, an inexplicable joy surged within her. How are you? Are you feeling better? Ethan asked softly, sitting behind Tyrande and whispering into her ear. Yes, a little, Tyrande replied softly, her ears slightly red and her voice trembling. But isn't this a bit excessive? This is how you should treat such upper-class elves, without mercy, Ethan said fiercely. Tyrande frowned slightly at his words, still struggling with her past. I have never been like this before, she admitted. In the past, these high-level elves were the ones who could directly determine our destiny. I was always cautious in front of them, afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. She turned to Ethan, her eyes full of curiosity and exploration. Ethan, you are really different. I always feel that your attitude towards the upper elves is completely different from everyone else I have met. They don't seem to be attracted by you at all. The high elves have ruled the night elves for so many years that the status gap between them has become deeply ingrained in the hearts of the night elves. For the average night elf, emotions towards these upper elves are very complex. Either they are revered like gods, despised with hatred, envied with a desire to surpass them, or viewed with an inferiority complex, believing they can never reach their level. In short, it is difficult for them to regard these our elves with a neutral perspective. Tyrande is no exception. Although she has grown into a brave and independent woman, her past experiences have left a deep mark on her heart. She used to be full of awe and admiration for those high-level elves. Now, although she has begun to challenge their authority, she still feels a little uneasy deep down. If it weren't for the deep imprint of the past, when Tyrande won the War of the Ancients in the original story and became the actual ruler of the Night Elves, she might not have had such an extreme attitude towards those who had fought alongside them and jointly opposed Queen Ashar's highborn. Her determination to almost force them all away was actually a manifestation of her sensitivity to the gap in power and status. Although Tyrande's strength and wisdom were growing day by day, she still had difficulty escaping the shadow of the past when facing the upper elves. Is there any? Ethan was slightly stunned, realizing that he had inadvertently revealed details that were not consistent with the Night Elves. The keen Tyrande also caught this subtle disharmony almost immediately, but she was too young to realize the problem. Ethan quickly adjusted his words, and tried to find a reasonable explanation for his unusualness. Maybe it's because I was born on the border and haven't had much experience with these arrogant guys, so I can stay calm, he shrugged and said easily. I haven't experienced the constraints and rules of you city people, so my behavior may be more unrestrained. In order to further enhance his persuasiveness, Ethan added, Moreover, I have traveled far and wide and met trolls, Tauren, Pandaren, and other races. For me, the so-called greatness of the Highborn is not something I take seriously. Hearing this, Tyrande couldn't help but look envious. It would be nice, she whispered, if only I could travel around the world like you. There will be this opportunity, Ethan nodded. He was about to say, just wait until the war is over, but considering that saying this would be setting a flag, he ultimately did not say anything further. Chapter 652, Attack from Behind. The name Lasal Raza, in the language of the Night Elves, carries a mysterious and reverent meaning, translating to the throne of the sky. As the name suggests, this city, built under the supervision of Queen Ashara herself, stands high atop a mountain, resembling a sacred fortress that connects heaven and earth, overlooking all living beings. The layout of the city centers around the grand temple of the glory of the moon god, radiating outward. Countless large and small temple buildings surround the great temple like stars around the moon. Each temple embodies the believer's piety and respect for the moon god Elune. In Ethan's eyes, Lasal Raza is not an ordinary city for civilians, but a holy place of faith. This place attracts followers of Elune from all corners, who come from far and wide to pay homage, seeking good luck and spiritual comfort under the boundless sky. Its status among the Night Elves is akin to that of the Vatican to Christianity or Jerusalem to Green Christianity. The core area of the city is strictly protected, with no room for intervention by the Moon Guard. The Sisters of Elune themselves have built an indestructible defense force. According to the news Tyrande received previously, Lasal Raza is currently implementing a strategy of easy entry and strict exit. Although ordinary people can still freely enter the city for pilgrimage, they must undergo strict investigation and review if they wish to leave the holy city. This measure ensures that the moon god priests can wholeheartedly guard this pure land of faith and prevents them from leaving Lasal Raza without permission to join the frontline battlefield, thereby stopping them from becoming a power zone for the resistance forces. Elune's faith is like the light of the full moon in Night Elf society, omnipresent and deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. Even the upper elves who control arcane magic, although their faith is relatively indifferent, do not completely lack it. As powerful as Queen Ashara is, she dares not openly challenge Elune's authority, because the power of this moon god holds an unshakable position in the entire Night Elf community. If those devout moon god priests were allowed to join the resistance on a large scale, declare the Burning Legion as invaders in the name of the moon god, and call on the people of the entire empire to stand up and resist, then the position and actions of Queen Ashara and the highborn elves would inevitably be questioned and resisted by countless disciples. Such consequences are unbearable for them. Therefore, at this time, all transmission points from this city to the outside world are closely guarded by moon guards. When Ethan and Tyrande flew into the city on hippogriffs, they were naturally attacked by the moon guards. The guards at those gates already viewed them as enemies and passed the news to their companions. Suddenly, a large number of blue and white arcane missiles attacked them, forming a sudden storm of magic. However, these tricks did not faze Ethan at all. He took action in time and applied Bark Spell and Stoneskin Spell to the hippogriff. These two powerful magics made the hippogriff's body turn gray, as if covered with a layer of indestructible armor. The weak arcane missiles hitting it did not cause any substantial damage, except for making it slightly unstable. After realizing that these attacks did not pose a threat, the hippogriff immediately calmed down from its panic. It spread its wings, flew, and hovered flexibly in the air, even beginning to fly majestically above the heads of the moon guards. Its actions seemed to mock the incompetence of these guards, making them jump with anger but helpless. However, the sudden reaction of the moon guards caused a wave of fear among the civilians who were pilgrims in the city. They instinctively thought there was an enemy attack and ran around in panic. In the midst of the chaos, people were frantically searching for a safe refuge. At this critical moment, a female night elf, dressed in a simple moon-white gown, appeared in front of the Temple of the Glory of the Moon. She walked out slowly and calmly, as if bathed in the serene light of the moon, illuminating everything around her. Behind her were a dozen women in priestly robes, their faces filled with determination and faith. "Your Majesty, the High Priest!" A believer, recognizing the distinguished figure, shouted excitedly, "Please save us!" The High Priest smiled and waved, spreading bits of silvery light to the panicked believers. This radiance was like the gentle caress of the moon god Elune, gradually calming their agitated emotions. Her warm and loving voice resonated through the crowd. "Everyone, please don't worry. As long as you are still in Lazal Raza, the Sisters of Elune will do their best to ensure your safety." After soothing the restless believers, the High Priest led her team back into the Great Temple. However, once inside, her expression turned serious. She looked at a woman with silver hair, a beautiful face, and a resolute expression, and said in a deep voice, "Maiev, find out what happened. The Moon Guard would not launch anti-air attacks without reason. There must be a cause behind this." The priestess named Maiev bowed her head respectfully and responded, "Yes, Your Majesty." Her figure gradually became illusory under the faint moonlight, eventually disappearing into the air, blending seamlessly into the boundless night. The High Priest's silver-white eyes gazed at the dark sky outside the temple, a thoughtful look crossing her face. She murmured, "Dear Elune, is this the turning point you mentioned? Could there be some unknown fate and crisis hidden behind this sudden commotion?" Tyrande skillfully controlled the hippogriff, nimbly dodging the arcane missiles, ensuring the hippogriff suffered minimal damage as they flew forward. Fortunately, the Moon Guard did not dare to go too far in this holy city. They knew well that the Sisters of Elune were the true masters of the city, so they refrained from deploying anti-air defense barriers. This allowed Tyrande and Ethan to continue flying smoothly without encountering any significant obstruction. Soon, they successfully entered the temple area of the city. Tyrande landed slowly in front of a temple building on the east side. The hippogriff's wings flapped gently, creating a soft breeze. However, the moment they landed, a group of people immediately surrounded them. "Who goes there?" A shout broke the silence around them. Since being put under disguised house arrest, the priests of the Sisterhood of Elune had been on high alert, always ready to protect the temple and the belief in the moon god, guarding against possible invasions by the Moon Guard. Ethan noticed that some of these people were holding bows and arrows, while others wielded three-petal moon blades, the traditional weapons of the moon priests. Additionally, they wore priestly garments, indicating they were not moon guards, but the armed force of the Sisters of Elune. This discovery was a relief to both Ethan and Tyrande. They knew that after entering Lazal Raza, it would be Tyrande's home ground. After all, she was a member of the moon god belief system and shared the same beliefs and ideals with these priests. Tyrande dismounted from the hippogriff gracefully and calmly, walking towards the priests with a smile. "Sisters, please put down your weapons," she said gently but firmly. Her words seemed to have a magical effect, instantly relaxing the tense atmosphere. She took out a silver badge from her chest, engraved with the pattern of a woman praying, a token of the moon god Elune. She showed the badge to the priests, and their expressions softened in recognition. Tyrande Whisperwind stepped forward, her voice steady and authoritative. "I am Tyrande Whisperwind, the priest of Suramar," she declared. "Following the orders of Lord Kurtalos Ravencrest, the commander of the Resistance, I have come to assist the Sisters of the Moonlight in liberating the lockdown Lazal Raza." Ethan Quai, standing beside her, avid lazily to the now relaxed priestesses, a warm smile on his face. "Hello, everyone. I am Ethan Quaya, a friend of Tyrande and a druid. I am happy to help you and fight alongside you to protect this sacred land." At that moment, a distant, holy female voice echoed from afar. "Sisters, let them come." Upon hearing this voice, the priestesses immediately sheathed their weapons, expressions of awe and piety replacing their earlier wariness. Tyrande and Ethan successfully passed through the circle of priests and entered the courtyard of the Temple of the Glory of the Moon. In the center of the courtyard stood a towering ancient tree. Its branches and leaves were lush, stretching out towards the sky as if to protect this sacred land. The surrounding buildings shimmered with a silvery white light under the moonlight, looking both solemn and mysterious. Suddenly, the slight sound of metal friction caught Ethan's attention. Startled, he looked back instinctively. A figure holding a wheel saw had appeared behind him, the sharp saw teeth less than 5 centimeters from his neck. Chapter 653, Maev's Shadow Song. Ethan was shocked to have his life threatened from such a close distance, but he remained calm. He raised his hands to show that he meant no harm and smiled, winking at the person approaching. "Sister Priest, can you please stop pointing such a dangerous weapon at me? I am a pacifist." The visitor was a female night elf. Her appearance was outstanding even among the elves, who were known for their good looks. She had long silver hair as smooth as a waterfall, eyes as deep as the sea, a high nose, and lips as red as cherries. Her figure was slender and well-proportioned, and she wore tight-fitting leather armor that perfectly outlined her curves. Holding a wheel saw, she looked both beautiful and dangerous. The moment Ethan saw her, he subconsciously activated his own aura of charm. Sure enough, after hearing Ethan's words, the female elf blushed slightly. She seemed to have never been called sister by such a handsome stranger of the opposite sex. This made her feel a little at a loss, and her voice even trembled. You'd better be honest with me. Men are not allowed to enter the great temple. If I find out that you have evil intentions," she stammered, but the wheel saw in her hand was quietly put down. At this moment, a voice came from the distance again. "Maev, be polite to our guests." After hearing this voice, the female elf holding the wheel saw immediately put away her weapon, bowed her head respectfully, and said, "Yes, High Priest Ijana." After she slowly withdrew the weapon, Ethan gently rubbed the back of his neck where he had goosebumps and turned his head thoughtfully to observe the beautiful priestess called Maev. "Maev? Judging from the unique moonblade, it should be the one I know," Ethan thought to himself, already having some guesses about the identity of this priestess. In the history of Warcraft, Maev's Shadowsong would become a famous leader of the Watchers in the future. She was one of the most high-end combat forces among the Night Elves. She had a fiery and paranoid personality, which led to many controversial reviews. However, these were things in the distant future. Today, Maev was just an ordinary priestess in the Sisterhood of Elune. But even so, Ethan could tell that her skills were genuine. Her movements were strong and agile, and her sudden appearance behind Ethan with her shadow escape had really shocked him. Even though he used his psychic powers to detect the surrounding information at all times, he only noticed her presence when she was within 3 meters of him. Considering Ethan's acumen, this was an incredible achievement, and he couldn't help but admire Maev. Of course, the reason why Maev was able to get so close to Ethan was actually because he allowed her to do so. He didn't want to expose his abilities too early, and because his psychic powers didn't detect any murderous intent in Maev's heart, he chose to be generous. If Maev had really taken action, Ethan was confident that he could burst out his psychic powers in an instant and restrain her movements. In today's Azeroth, except for the top powerhouses such as Wild Demigod and Archimonde, Ethan was confident that his strength and abilities were not weaker than anyone else's. However, he understood that as an outsider, he must keep a low profile and maintain caution. He did not want to cause unnecessary trouble and conflict, but hoped to establish a good cooperative relationship with the Sisters of Elune. In fact, within the Sisterhood of Elune, Maev had stood out because of her strong skills, capable handling, and leadership abilities. Not only had she won the respect of some groups, but she was also regarded by many as the most favorable choice for the next High Priest. However, Ethan knew that although Maev was supported by many female priests as the next High Priest, she would eventually lose to Tyrande of the Skyfall system. Future competition. This is not because Maev lacks ability, but because she has someone to buy her. It can be said that the Moon Goddess, Elune's favor for Tyrande, is almost unlimited. She personally sent an oracle and named Tyrande as the future High Priest. In such a belief system centered on Elune, the current High Priest Dina has to follow the goddess's will, even if she has doubts. As everyone was preparing to go to the main temple, Maiev did not escort Ethan and Tyrande like the other priestesses. Instead, she turned around and jumped onto the outer wall of the temple, her movements light and agile, like a vigorous nighthawk. Tyrande looked at her back and asked in confusion, "Won't Priest Maiev go with us to meet with the High Priest?" Maiev turned around and glanced at Tyrande. Her deep eyes seemed to flash with a complicated light. Instead of answering Tyrande's question, Maiev turned around and disappeared from everyone's sight. However, Ethan saw through Maev's mind. He looked in the direction Maiev disappeared, a meaningful smile playing on his lips, and said softly, "Those moon guards are still outside. She must have gone to help us clean up our tale." Speaking of this, he curiously asked the others, "This lady priest does seem a bit different from the clergy I know." A female priest next to him heard Ethan's words and explained softly, "The Maiev priests are responsible for commanding the combat priest troops in the sisterhood. Their style of conduct is indeed different from ordinary missionary priests. They pay more attention to practical skills and strategies. They are an indispensable force in the sisterhood." When Ethan, Tyrande, and the others entered the main hall of the Temple of the Glory of the Moon, they found that the noise outside the temple had gradually subsided. This made Ethan curious about what Maiev had been doing during this time. However, he didn't have much time to explore this issue, because the scene in front of him had completely captured their attention. On the way to the main hall, a huge statue about 10 meters high stood there, as if welcoming their arrival. The statue was vividly depicted, showing a female night elf raising her hands in the motion of holding the moon. Although her appearance was a bit blurry, her elegance and nobility were still palpable. She wore a dress similar to that of a priest, but the decoration was simpler and more elegant, exuding an otherworldly temperament. At the foot of the statue was a small lake emitting a light blue glow. The water of the lake was crystal clear, and gentle energy steamed up from its surface. The soft light illuminated the lower body of the statue, which was clad in a priest's dress. The whole scene gave off a quiet and mysterious feeling, as if time had stopped at that moment. Ethan looked at the statue with a look of surprise in his eyes. Is this the image of a loon in the night elves' minds? He wondered aloud, staring at the solemn and mysterious statue in front of him. He couldn't help but sigh with emotion. By the way, are you so sure that she is the shape of a night elf? Of course, Ethan did not express these thoughts aloud, otherwise he would definitely be kicked out on the spot by the group of religious fanatics around him. Ethan had read a statement before, Moon Goddess Elune, as one of the rare true gods in Azeroth. If she wanted to condense a physical form in the material world, she should choose the native species of Azeroth. However, an embarrassing situation arises. The Night Elves are not the original indigenous people of this continent. Their ancestors are actually trolls. These are the real indigenous people of Azeroth. This thought flashed through Ethan's mind, bringing an indescribable sense of absurdity. He imagined, if the acceptance of the Night Elves was not considered, Elune might more likely transform into a female troll. What would that be like? Ha! Is that what you actually think? Just as Ethan's thoughts were running wild like a wild horse, a chuckle suddenly sounded in his mind, like a gentle breeze. A ghostly presence startled him instantly. Who? Ethan turned his head sharply, scanning the surroundings to find the source of the sound. His sudden movement alarmed the nearby priestesses, who all cast concerned glances his way. Tyrande patted Ethan's shoulder lightly, her eyes full of confusion. "Ethan, what's wrong with you?" she asked. Ethan came back to his senses and looked at Tyrande and the surrounding priestesses. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the turmoil in his heart. "Did you hear anything just now?" All the priestesses, including Tyrande, showed strange expressions. "No," Tyrande replied softly, gently covering Ethan's head with her right hand, which exuded a silvery shimmer. Her fingers ran through his hair, as if searching for something. After a brief inspection, she frowned slightly, a trace of worry flashing in her eyes. "You are indeed a little nervous, but you don't seem to be in any disorder. What happened, Ethan?" "It's nothing," Ethan shook his head gently. "Maybe I'm just too sensitive." An older priestess walked over, her eyes filled with compassion and love. She patted Ethan's shoulder gently and said softly, "You must have experienced many hardships and dangers along the way and are exhausted. Please persist, and the High Priest will heal your inner wounds." "I hope so," Ethan whispered softly, his eyes drifting involuntarily to the statue in the center of the small lake. Under the moonlight, the statue seemed to exude a soft and mysterious light, which was awe-inspiring. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to calm his inner turmoil. "If I tell them that a being suspected of being Elune just spoke to me directly, how will the priestesses with strong faith react? Will they believe me, or will they fall into deep self-doubt?" Ethan shook his head, temporarily putting these chaotic thoughts behind him. Chapter 654, The Goddess's DDoS Attack. After a brief panic, Ethan gradually calmed down. He took the initiative to strengthen the inner blockade of his psychic powers, just in case a similar situation happened again. At the same time, he began to reflect on his previous actions. He had been too careless, entering the temple rashly without being fully prepared, which allowed Elune's thoughts to take advantage of him. Ethan recalled a saying, "For gods, their temples in the mortal world are equivalent to their divine kingdoms." Although Elune did not become a god through faith, perhaps the temple had the same effect on her. This was her domain, after all, and her power and influence here would undoubtedly be stronger. As a time traveler, Ethan knew he could not underestimate Elune's possible curiosity about him. After all, he came from a completely different world and possessed unique power and knowledge. These factors might attract Elune's attention and interest. The official organization responsible for managing the faith of Elune is called the Sisterhood of Elune. The name itself clearly reflects the composition of the priests of Elune. They are all women without exception. These female priests maintain Elune's faith with their piety and wisdom and play a pivotal role in Night Elf society. The current leader of the Sisterhood is High Priestess Dejana. She was born in a peaceful era, so her style is known for being steady, though she is slightly lacking in decisiveness. Faced with the massive invasion of the Burning Legion and the aggressiveness of the Highborn Elves, High Priestess Dejana is more inclined to adopt a conservative strategy. She hopes to resolve the differences between the Highborn Elves and the commoners through peaceful talks and bring harmony and stability to Night Elf society. In peaceful times, High Priestess Dejana's approach, though slower to produce results, would be more stable and controllable. After all, for the Night Elves who sit on the Well of Eternity and live for thousands of years, time is a resource that is not scarce. However, in the current grim situation, where the enemy's army is pressing down on the border and countless compatriots are dying miserably at the hands of demons day and night, whether this gentle strategy is still appropriate has become a question worthy of discussion. Although the priestesses maintain due respect for High Priestess Dejana, privately, many of them have some criticisms of her leadership style. They hope that a more courageous sister can take over the leadership position and lead them to resolutely resist the invasion of the Burning Legion and fight for the future of the Night Elves. This desire for change quietly spread within the Sisterhood, forming an undercurrent that cannot be ignored. This is also the reason why Maiev, as the leader of the battle priests, has gained such high prestige. With her bravery and determination, she has won the admiration and support of many priestesses. In their eyes, Maiev is not only an outstanding warrior, but also a leader who can guide them into a new era. When he met High Priestess Dejana in person, Ethan discovered that she was a kind-hearted elder. Although her face was still beautiful due to the racial characteristics of the Night Elves, and she did not show any signs of aging, her temperament was like that of an ancient tree, deep and steady, making people unable to help but be in awe of the long years she had experienced. "Thank you, sisters," Dejana said softly. "Please give me and these two guests a little private space." As her words fell, the surrounding priests bowed respectfully and then quietly retreated. At this moment, only Dejana, Tyrande, and Ethan were left standing on the shore of the small lake. High Priestess Dejana's eyes, with a faint silver light, moved slowly between Tyrande and Ethan. Tyrande, who was still young, did not notice the deep meaning in the High Priestess's eyes. She took a step forward and reported to Dejana the purpose of their trip and the current situation on the battlefield. Tyrande's voice was firm and powerful, befitting the future leader of the Night Elves. Her narration was detailed and vivid, as if the tragic battle scenes were unfolding before Dejana's eyes. Her analysis of the situation was clear-cut, revealing her innate talent in this area. However, as Tyrande's story progressed, High Priest Dejana's attention gradually shifted from her to Ethan, who stood silently beside her. Dejana turned her head slightly, scrutinizing the strange guest with her wise eyes. Although Ethan appeared calm on the surface, Dejana's long-term experience as the High Priest of the Sisterhood made her realize that there was something special about him. Ever since he stepped into the sacred temple, known as the closest to Elune, the vague sounds Ethan had intermittently heard before became clearer, like amplified whispers constantly echoing in his ears. Fortunately, Ethan had taken the initiative to strengthen his protection against psychic powers, preventing this somewhat willful goddess from easily prying into his thoughts. However, she seemed unwilling to relent and continued to whisper to him, trying to break his defenses. Apart from direct inner communication, the words of the true God were always difficult for mortals to understand, as if they were the language of another dimension. Perhaps this is why Elune needed a spokesperson on Earth, because only the chosen could truly understand and convey her will. Ethan's mind was filled with countless disjointed murmurs, threatening to swallow his sanity. For a moment, he even suspected that he had not met Elune, but had fallen into the trap of an ancient god. Of course, this conjecture was quickly dismissed by Ethan himself. If he were in the headquarters of the Sisters of Elune and could be influenced by the old gods, then Elune would not be worthy of being a true god. Ethan felt an indescribable fatigue welling up in his heart. He took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice as steady as possible, and then said to Dejana with some urgency, "Dear High Priest, can you prepare a separate room for me so that I can rest?" "High Priest? Ethan, this is—" Tyrande was surprised to find that her companion was in an abnormal state. Worry welled up in her eyes like a tide, and she quickly looked at High Priest Dejana, hoping to get some answers or assistance from her. However, Dejana waved her hand to interrupt Tyrande's inquiry, her expression unusually serious. Dejana's eyes were as deep as the sea. She stared closely at Ethan, who was meditating with his eyes closed in front of her, as if she wanted to look straight into his soul. Ethan's eyes, which shone with pale golden light, left an indelible impression on Dejana's heart. Now she seemed to have discovered something. After a while, Dejana slowly withdrew her gaze and turned back to Tyrande, her voice full of awe and emotion. "Sir, Elune, I originally thought that you were the only one she chose as her messenger. I never imagined that, besides you, there is him." With Tyrande's careful help, Ethan finally reached a quiet and separate room. He leaned tiredly against the soft wall, closed his eyes, and began to concentrate on dealing with the whispers of the true God that kept echoing in his mind. Ethan had completely blocked the channel for spiritual communication, making it impossible for Elune to communicate with him as easily as she could with other believers. The true God seemed confused and helpless about Ethan's actions. She seemed to have never encountered such a situation. None of her followers had ever done this, and even if they could, out of the instinct of faith, they would not. Elune did not know how to deal with someone like Ethan suddenly. However, she did not give up. She tried again and again to instill her will into Ethan's mind, hoping to break his mental barrier. This constant impact gave Ethan a splitting headache, making it unbearable. This is the first time Ethan has encountered such a persistent deity, though he had never seen any gods before. Despite having activated high, spiritual barrier, clearly signaling that he was not welcoming any intrusions, this deity, Elune, continued to bombard him with information. Ethan had always imagined gods to be noble and reserved, but the sight of Elune before him shattered that notion. This true god behaved like a spoiled child, lacking the grace or majesty one would expect. To Ethan, Elune's behavior was akin to an irate hacker trying to remotely control a computer using a Trojan virus. When she found she could not succeed, she did not retreat gracefully, but instead launched a mindless DDoS attack. If the source of the DDoS attack had been an ordinary person, Ethan's psychological barrier could have easily ignored it. However, this was a true God-level DDoS attack. Although it couldn't forcefully penetrate Ethan's consciousness, it buzzed incessantly in his ears like countless mosquitoes. Eventually, Ethan could no longer endure the constant interference from the deity. He took a deep breath and decided to lower his inner defenses slightly to hear what Elune wanted to convey. This decision had immediate and dramatic consequences. As soon as he opened his heart a little, the noisy whispers vanished, replaced by tranquility and clarity. The bright moon hung high in the sky, casting a faint silver light into the courtyard. Ethan gently opened the door, walked to the center of the courtyard, and bathed in the cold moonlight. He closed his eyes, feeling the tranquility and mystery, as well as the presence of Elune's will. Chapter 6 and 55, Oracle. At this moment, Ethan heard that voice again, a soft and gentle female voice that seemed to penetrate directly into the depths of his soul. The so-called voice was more of a direct communication through spirit. "Child, can you hear me clearly now?" "Yes, my dear Elune, the moon goddess." Ethan opened his eyes and looked at the bright moon in the sky, appearing very humble and polite. Even someone as proud as he had to maintain the utmost respect when facing a true deity. However, this did not mean he believed in Elune as fervently as the night elves did. After the basic greetings, without waiting for Elune to speak, he took the initiative. "Dear Miss Elune, I am honored to converse with you. However, I have a doubt. Why are you so persistent in communicating with me?" Elune didn't seem displeased by Ethan's directness. She answered in a gentle voice, "I just feel it is necessary to communicate with a special child like you." "Special?" Ethan frowned slightly, feeling an inexplicable doubt in his heart. "Of course," Elune chuckled softly. Her laughter was as sweet as a clear spring, making one instinctively feel an indescribable sense of intimacy. "I noticed you when you came to Azeroth. You, my outsider relatives." Ethan's heart stirred as he realized Elune used the word "you" instead of referring to him alone. He instantly understood that Elune was not just referring to him as a human, but also included the other 3 time travelers in the ancient war, the human mage Ronin, the red dragon Crassus, and the orc warrior Broxigar. In other words, she regarded him as a time traveler like the 3 of them, and Elune did not know his true origin. "Then you must know that I am not a real night elf," Ethan said immediately. "Like Mr. Ronin, I am just a human from the future. The appearance of a night elf today is just my disguise." "What does that matter?" Elune said with a tolerant smile. "God loves the world, and my followers are not limited to the night elves." Ethan was slightly stunned. He didn't expect Elune to view his identity in this way. He couldn't help but ask curiously, "Even if I don't believe in you?" Elune smiled softly. "As long as you can bring good changes to this world, regardless of whether you believe in me or not, I will treat you as my child." When Ethan heard Elune's answer, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. This goddess's mind and magnanimity were indeed extraordinary. He was surprised by her different style. In the original work of Warcraft, Elune had never been a pedantic person. She couldn't see the future, but to support the Shadow Realm and prevent a worse future from coming, she could even watch the Horde burn the Night Elves' world tree. The fire caused countless elves to lose their lives, and their souls poured into the Shadow Realm. All of this was to increase Elune's influence on the Shadow Realm so that it could play a decisive role at critical moments. Such behavior, in the eyes of those who adhere to moral principles, is undoubtedly an unscrupulous approach to achieve the goal. But Elune did this, which is enough to show her flexibility. After a brief silence, Ethan couldn't help but ask, "Why me? Ronin is a powerful mage, and Crassus is even the leader among the 10 red dragon tribes. They should be more helpful to this world than me, right?" Elune smiled slightly, and there was a profound meaning in her voice. "Because you are the most special." Ethan's heart moved, realizing that although Elune did not see his true origin, she was keenly aware of his difference. As a true god, her insight was truly extraordinary. After a moment of silence, Ethan nodded and said in the tone of a true time traveler, "Okay, since I am special, I will do my best to bring good changes to this world." Ethan chose to come to this era to bring beneficial changes to Azeroth. "So, please tell me, what do you need me to do?" he asked. "First of all, I want to apologize to you, Elune said solemnly. After you time travelers arrived, I saw some fragments from the future in Yo, or consciousness. This, us? Ethan's face changed slightly upon hearing this. He asked, bewildered. Dear Elune, you mean we don't have any secrets in front of you? Even our innermost thoughts are easily perceived by you? He couldn't believe it. Could it be that when he was careless and unprepared, Elune really got a glimpse of some secret? However, Elune's next answer brought him some relief. Of course, not including you, child, Elune said reproachfully. You are too guarded against me, and I can't break through your mental barrier to see your thoughts. But because of this, I chose you as my dependent. As she spoke, she mentioned the 3 real-time travelers. When you came to this world, I began to pay attention to you. Among the 4 of you, only your soul is the most powerful and the most brilliant. Although they are also excellent time travelers, they are not as capable as you. I will not take the initiative to read their thoughts, but when their mood swings become more intense, certain memories naturally emerge. Ethan smiled bitterly and shook his head, sighing inwardly at the goddess's terrifying insight. He sighed and said, Well, it seems that I'd better not let them know that you have seen through some of my little secrets. So, dear Miss Elune, what do you want to order me? Time is running out, and my consciousness cannot be projected into the material world for long, so I will keep the story short. Elune's voice became more distant. First of all, please help me take care of my other dependent, Tyrande. She seems to be encountering big trouble in the future, and I have to project a lot of power to protect her. If this really happens, I hope you can help her. When Ethan agreed, Elune smiled happily, leaving only one sentence in the end. Then, do your best to change the world. One day in the future, my followers and I will try our best to repay you for this kindness. After Elune's consciousness faded away from the material world, Ethan, standing in the courtyard of the great temple, opened his eyes. Favor? Trouble? Reaching out his left hand and touching his chin, Ethan said thoughtfully, It seems we must act as soon as possible. What Ethan didn't know was that every move of a god like Elune would trigger corresponding visions. The moment he had a conversation with Elune in the depths of his soul, the world outside underwent earth-shaking changes. The originally gloomy and oppressive sky suddenly opened a gap, and bright light fell from it, as if an invisible giant hand was ruthlessly tearing open the black veil covering the sky. The bright moon, which had been shrouded in darkness for a long time, was like a pearl washed clean of dust, hanging high above the dark purple sky with several times its usual brightness, cold and dazzling. Such visions were not limited to the vicinity of the seat of the sky. The rebel positions marching towards Zinashari in the distance, and even every piece of land and every mountain peak in the suburbs of Zinashari felt this wave of mysterious power. Both sides, who were originally fighting on the battlefield, looked up to the sky in unison, their eyes filled with awe. In the center of Zinashari, on the shore of the Well of Eternity, a place where demons constantly emerged, a beautiful woman with dazzling golden eyes also felt the fluctuation of this power. She looked at the sky with a serious expression, and her deep golden eyes seemed to reflect the changes in the world. Is this Elune's power? She murmured to herself, with a hint of surprise in her voice. Elune, why did you send down the oracle at this time? She didn't understand what it meant. Could it be that Elune, who had always maintained a neutral stance, finally decided to stand up and express her attitude by showing such a powerful force at this critical moment? Chapter 656, The Chosen One. As night fell, the vision created by Elune was like a flash in the pan, beautiful and short-lived. The shocking scene did not last long, and soon everything returned to calm. The clouds and mist gathered gently, and after the full moon quietly disappeared into the clouds, the curtain of darkness fell silently again, as if everything that was exciting before was just an illusion in people's hearts. However, for Tyrande and Maiev, who witnessed this change with their own eyes, some things had changed irreversibly. Although the night once again enveloped the earth, they kept thinking about the shocking scene they had just witnessed. Tyrande, do you think this is a vision caused by Elune? Maiev turned her head curiously and looked at the young priestess beside her, a searching light in her eyes. Although she did not fully understand why the high priest valued the two visitors so much, the vision just now made her realize that there were indeed profound reasons behind the priest's decision. Tyrande looked up at the sky, her gaze seeming to penetrate the clouds and reach the bright moon hanging high in the night sky. "It's unmistakable," she finally spoke, her voice firm and powerful. "This familiar feeling is undoubtedly Elune's power." She paused and continued. "Why? I have never seen Elune pay so much attention to a male night elf." In her memory, although Elune loved all night elves equally, only female elves could communicate with her. However, this time, she felt unprecedented attention and importance from the male night elf. In fact, there was something hidden in Tyrande's heart that she did not say to Maiev. "I have never seen Elune pay as much attention to another night elf as she does to me." However, if such words were said out loud, it would be too harsh in Maiev's ears, and it might be an unacceptable blow to her. So Tyrande chose silence. As Elune's favorite spokesperson, Tyrande had a closer connection with the mysterious moon goddess than any other priest of the sisterhood. She seemed to be Elune's shadow in the main material plane, conveying the will and power of the moon god at all times. As a true god, Elune could not directly enter the main material plane, and even simply projecting power was very difficult. Therefore, every time the oracle was obtained, every time Elune sent down her power, it was a significant event for the Sisters of Elune. However, for Tyrande, this rule did not seem to exist. At certain special moments, she could even feel the power of the moon god pouring into her body like a warm torrent, allowing her to possess the power given by the moon god. Although she had not yet become the powerful high priest she would be in the future, Tyrande was already keenly aware of what made her unique. She was quite proud of her specialness, but at the same time, she had learned to keep a low profile in this regard after feeling the subtle jealousy of her sisters. However, now she found that the same attention was paid to another night elf, who was still a male. This made her feel a little bit uneasy, but it was more of curiosity and recognition. After all, in her eyes, Ethan, who was also favored by Elune, was almost like her kind. Tyrande clasped her hands together, closed her eyes quietly, and prayed devoutly to the moon god Elune deep in her heart. "Great Elune, please enlighten your loyal followers. What happened? Why do you want to show your will to the world at this moment? What mission does this Ethan carry?" As the prayer ended, she slowly opened her eyes and looked at Ethan with a little more kindness. At the same time, in the main hall, High Priest Dejana specifically asked Maiev to drive away Tyrande, and then she and the priests were discussing how to break through the Moon Guard's blockade of the city so that the main force of the Elune sisters could rush to the front line to participate in the decisive battle to drive out the devil. When the battle priest who was responsible for guarding outside the house told the group of female priests about the mutation, High Priest Dejana looked in the direction where the moonlight was falling, her expression changing. "That direction. Is it the room where the druid lives?" An elderly priest in the lead immediately shouted, "Quick, go back and find out why the goddess's grace has come to the temple." When the large group of priests arrived at the scene, everything had already settled. Ethan and Elune's exchange had ended. Seeing so many people in front of him, Ethan was a little surprised. However, he quickly regained his composure, stood up, and slowly swept his eyes across the crowd, finally settling on Tyrande, who was walking at the back. Maiev stood aside, her eyes vaguely falling on Ethan, as if she was examining him silently. But Ethan didn't pay her any attention. He just waved slightly to Tyrande, a faint smile on his face. Tyrande seemed a little embarrassed in the crowd. It wasn't that she hadn't experienced big scenes before. Although she had once gained some popularity with her soothing achievements in Suramar, in this religious holy place, La Salrasa, she was surrounded by elite priests who were devout and proficient in doctrine. These people made her feel a little inferior. Here, she was just an ordinary priest, mixed in with the senior ranks of the Sisters of Elune, and seemed a little out of place. This was evident from her position in the back row. She was clearly not able to adapt to the grand scene of such a high-profile gathering. Ethan seemed to sense Tyrande's uneasiness. He took the initiative to step forward and asked softly, How is it going? Have you discussed a breakout plan? At this time, Tyrande did not display the frankness and decisiveness she had in the past. She first acknowledged the priests around her, then came to Ethan. She looked into his eyes and took a deep breath, as if to draw some courage and strength from this new friend. "Hey," Ethan said, looking at Tyrande's nervous and uneasy expression. He couldn't help but pat her shoulder heavily, as if he wanted to transfer power to her in this way. "Show confidence and hold your chest high. You are the savior of the people of Suramar. To a certain extent, your performance represents the entire sisterhood of Suramar. You know, with your merits, you should have been promoted to the high priest in charge of Suramar by now." Seeing that she was still a little confused, Ethan continued. "If you continue to interact with other priests in such a low profile, you will only make others look down on you. Show the courage you displayed when you organized the people of Suramar to resist the Burning Legion." Tyrande opened her mouth, as if she wanted to say something, but hesitated. She lowered her head, looking at her toes, and said in a weak voice, "But, Mr. Ethan is right," High Priest Dejana interjected as she approached. She had just finished asking about the strange situation from others, and now had a kind smile on her face. Maiev still followed her closely, her wary eyes never leaving Ethan. Dejana gently touched Tyrande's indigo hair, smiling as she comforted her. "Don't worry about offending others with your words. The Sisters of Elune are just like the name suggests. The members of the organization are all sisters to each other. You can speak freely here and show your true self." She paused and continued. "Your performance in Suramar is indeed eye-catching. What you have done proves your ability and value. You are as good as any high-ranking priest of La Salraza. So please raise your head and face everything with confidence." After that, she left. "It's the High Priest," Tyrande said, glancing furtively at the other priests around her, then continued her conversation with Ethan. She deliberately lowered her voice and revealed to Ethan, "We have just tentatively determined the general direction, and the details of the breakout plan are still under discussion." She paused slightly, her blue eyes fixed on Ethan's dark golden ones, a trace of worry flashing in them. Tyrande's eyes bore into her companion as she continued in a low voice, "Ethan, does the sudden change in the world just now have anything to do with you?" "A sudden change in the world?" Ethan frowned slightly, repeating the phrase. An inexplicable uneasiness settled in his heart. "What kind of unforeseen change? I don't quite understand what you mean." Tyrande looked at Ethan with some surprise, as if she hadn't expected his ignorance. "Don't you know," she reminded softly, "we all came here to visit you because we sensed the abnormal changes in the world." Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he realized the gravity of the situation. He took a deep breath to calm himself, and then listened carefully to Tyrande's explanation. As she spoke, Ethan gradually pieced together the puzzle. It turned out that Elune hadn't contacted him privately, but had orchestrated a grand scheme for him. Chapter 657, Maiev's Vigilance. In a very public manner, Elune conveyed a message to the entire sisterhood that Ethan Quie was someone she valued. "No wonder these people are staring at me like I'm a giant panda." Ethan murmured to himself. "I thought it was my charm that worked, but it turns out it's because of this." Elune's move caught him off guard, making him feel as though he had been suddenly thrust into the spotlight. The effect of Elune's small speaker broadcast was immediate. Now everyone knew that Ethan Quie was no ordinary person. It was no longer possible for him to keep a low profile, so he had no choice but to face the sudden attention. At the same time, he realized that he had become closely connected with Elune and the entire sisterhood. This binding relationship made him feel a bit helpless, but he had to admit that it was a rare opportunity. Sure enough, the boss is the boss. When she sees a potential investment target, she takes action decisively and ties the opponent to the chariot. Although Ethan felt a bit passive about Elune's approach, he didn't harbor much resentment. After all, Elune did not use him in vain, but gave him corresponding rewards. This kind of broadcast itself was a form of recognition and support for him, symbolizing his improvement in status. In other words, the small speaker broadcast itself was part of the reward. The Sisterhood of Elune is a major organization among the Night Elves, second only to the future druids in terms of high-end strength, and second only to the past Queen Ashara in terms of control over the hearts of the Night Elves. After the war, they became the rulers of the Night Elves. Being bound to such a powerful organization was undoubtedly a huge promotion for Ethan. He had gone from a little-known stranger to a big shot that everyone must take seriously in an instant. This was one of the goals he had hoped to achieve when he approached Tyrande, but now it had been achieved in such an unexpected way. What's even better is that most of the members in the sisterhood are young ladies with outstanding appearance and elegant temperament. They not only have eye-catching beauty, but also possess extraordinary wisdom and strength. They are the best among the Night Elves. If Ethan had followed his original plan, he might have been able to get acquainted with Archdruid Malfurion through his relationship with Tyrande and use his druid abilities to find a good status among the Night Elves' druids. However, the current situation gave him a better choice. Ethan only needed to use his charm and talk to the Night Elf sisters, and he could easily integrate into this group without having to deal with those old-fashioned guys who spend all their time in the woods. This kind of life was undoubtedly more comfortable for him. While Ethan was immersed in this joy, Tyrande was a little unhappy. She punched Ethan gently and said angrily, "Why did your charm work? Are you such a stinky person?" Ethan smiled and didn't mind Tyrande's teasing. The two had walked together for many days, and with Ethan's deliberate approach, this slightly intimate interaction had become a tacit understanding and habit between them. "Giant pandas and stuff. You are referring to the Pandaren you mentioned before, right?" Tyrande asked curiously. Ethan nodded. When the two of them were traveling together before, Ethan, like Tyrande, fabricated some of his experiences of traveling around on the continent of Kalimdor. Relying on his knowledge of various races in Azeroth from his previous life, he described those fictional experiences so vividly that Tyrande was mesmerized. In Tyrande's eyes, the worlds of the Troll Kingdom, the Pandaren Kingdom, and the Tauren, Quilboar, and other races described by Ethan were so real and vivid. After all, the Tarot Troll Kingdom, the Pandaren Kingdom, and various races such as Tauren and Wild Boars are not unrecorded by Night Elves. If you have not personally been to those places, you will not be able to fabricate so many real details just by making the mem up. Therefore, she firmly believes in Ethan's words and sincerely admires his knowledge and experience. While Ethan and Tyrande were whispering aside, High Priestess Dejana stood up slowly. Her clear and firm voice echoed in the air, attracting everyone's attention. "Sisters," High Priestess Dejana looked at everyone present. "I believe you all understand something. What just happened was a divine revelation from the goddess Elune. This Mr. Ethan Quoye, although he is a man, is also the chosen one of the goddess. Therefore, I hope that everyone can sincerely accept him, respect him, and honor him as you do me, just as you treat every sister in our sisterhood." After endorsing Ethan's status, High Priestess Dejana changed the subject. "Mr. Ethan, together with Sister Tyrande, came to report external intelligence to us and invite us to join the resistance. Since he has been blessed by the goddess, it means the goddess has expressed her will. She clearly requires us to join the war against the devil. This means that we must break through the blockade of Lasal Raza as soon as possible and rush to the battlefield. The situation on the front line, it doesn't seem optimistic." As High Priestess Dejana set the tone for the direction of the Sisters of Elune, everyone began to prepare to go to the front line. Tyrande and Ethan both breathed a sigh of relief. They knew that the next task would be more difficult, but at least they now had a clear goal. However, as a druid, Ethan did not understand the internal affairs of the sisterhood. Although he had just received Elune's divine enlightenment, he was not a true priest after all. Therefore, in the following meetings, he did not participate in discussing specific plans on how to break through the siege. Ethan left the task of spreading the message to Tyrande, and then, escorted by Maiev, he returned to the previous courtyard. The courtyard was filled with the fragrance of flowers, and the afternoon sun shone through the treetops, casting mottled light and shadow on the ground. Ethan felt the warm sunshine on his body, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace and tranquility in his heart. Judging from the temperature of the light, the current season was definitely not a hot summer. He had just traveled to this world not long ago and had not yet fully adapted to the night elves' living habits of sleeping during the day and emerging at night. On the way to La Salraza, he and Tarand had been resting during the day and traveling at night. Calculating carefully, he had not basked in the sun so leisurely for many days. At this moment, he was sitting on a stone bench in the courtyard, closing his eyes, feeling the touch of the sun and the gentle breeze. Maiev stood quietly aside, scanning the surroundings with vigilant eyes to ensure that there was no danger approaching, and at the same time, it was also a kind of surveillance on him. Under the combined effect of high perception and psychic powers, stealth, a technique that relies on the power of shadow to hide one's body, had lost its original mystery in Ethan's eyes. Just like thick fog cannot block the light of the scorching sun, the stalker's cover with shadow also became invisible to Ethan's psychic powers. His psychic powers were like a dragnet woven by countless tiny tentacles, spreading silently to every corner. As long as the stalker had not completely merged into the shadows and lost her entity, her existence could not escape the capture of this net. "You are indeed strange," a whisper broke the tranquility of the courtyard. Maiev seemed to have noticed Ethan's sight and realized that her whereabouts had been exposed. She simply walked out of the shadows openly and stood in front of the bench where Ethan was sitting. At this time, she looked at Ethan not only with vigilance, but also with a bit of inquiry and curiosity, as if she wanted to see through this man who made her feel unusual. Ethan opened his eyes slightly, the afternoon sunlight dancing in his pupils, and a lazy smile appeared on his handsome face. Stared at by Ethan's half-smiling eyes, Maiev suddenly felt flustered and subconsciously looked away. "Huh?" Ethan asked softly. "What's weird?" Maiev crossed her arms over her chest, forcing herself to calm down, and replied in a composed tone, "Most of the night elves love the tranquility and mystery of the night, and worship the moon far more than the sun. In our culture, the day is a time for rest and preparation, while the night is a time for activity and exploration." She collected her thoughts and looked at Ethan again. "As far as I know, in the entire vast Dark Knight Empire, there are only a handful of unique individuals who go out of their homes to bask in the sun during the day. One of them is a famous upper elf family. They have such a habit. Although their behavior is regarded as unusual, they have also earned the title of Daywalker." Maiev stared closely into Ethan's eyes, as if trying to discern some clues. "Could it be that you are a descendant or distant relative of that family?" Ethan rolled his eyes at this, and a helpless smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "That's a boring speculation. I just like the warm touch of basking in the sun, not because I worship the sun or want to imitate that family. Everyone has their own unique lifestyle and preferences, don't they?" Chapter 6 and 58. The Method of Stimulating Generals. When Maiev mentioned that prominent family, Ethan's thoughts were instantly ignited, and a name emerged in his mind. "Sun Chaser," he murmured in a low voice. This name held unique status and honor among the Upper Elves. They were a rare family among the Upper Elves that stood on the side of the resistance. Their choice brought this family to glory and left a mark in the long history of the Elves. Of course, their glory did not come from the Night Elves. After all, the Sun Chasers are high-level elves who started out with arcane magic. Although they cooperated well with the low-level elves during the war, their fundamental contradiction was exposed after the war. There was a huge conflict between the remaining upper elves, represented by the Sunstriders, and the ordinary night elves, regarding whether to continue to use arcane power. In the end, they simply left their homeland angrily with their persistence and belief in arcane magic, crossing the vast ocean to the Eastern Kingdom to seek a new habitat. There, they gradually evolved into the later High Elves and continued to write their own legends. That's right. Before Ethan could say anything more, Maiev had already convinced herself. The divine revelation from the moon god Elune will not come for no reason, let alone be given to 10 men outside the sisterhood. Her sharp eyes looked back and forth on Ethan, as if trying to penetrate the depths of his soul. Maiev said thoughtfully, "There must be something special about you that Elune values." Maev's eyes seemed to be scanning her prey, which made Ethan roll his eyes helplessly. He knew very well how persistent and crazy the future watcher was for her prey, and she made the future Illidan miserable. Yes, he didn't want to be her next hunting target. By the way, Ethan suddenly hit his palm, seeming to remember something important. Priest Maev, I remember your last name is Shadowsong, right? Maev nodded slightly. Yes, is there any problem? She didn't understand why Ethan suddenly mentioned her last name. Well, I suddenly remembered what I heard from Tyrande. Ethan smiled and touched his chin. If the information she provided is correct, there is a captain who is currently leading the resistance army. With his outstanding talents, he is favored by the commander of the army, Lord Ravencase. He has almost been promoted to deputy to the commander-in-chief. His name seems to be Jared Shadowsong. You are both named Shadowsong, and you are both from Suramar. If there is no coincidence, I guess he is your family member. Is it right?
What did you say?
Maev suddenly rushed to Ethan's side and grabbed his wrist tightly. You mean Jared? At this moment, her face could no longer see the calmness and composure from before. Instead, it was full of shock and excitement. He is the deputy to the commander of the resistance army? How is this possible? He is just an ordinary city guard captain of Black Crow Castle. Ethan looked at Maev's reaction and couldn't help but chuckle inwardly. An expected reaction, he thought. For him, who had known the original work for a long time, this was just pretending to be confused, and he said this just to change the subject. He spread his hands and continued, At least that's the news I got. It is said that Mr. Jared just took office recently and is considered a dazzling new star emerging in the resistance. Damn. Maev let go of Ethan's wrist, with an expression of disbelief on her face. She took a deep breath and tried to calm down her emotions. This is too sudden. I had no idea he would become the second-in-command to the rebel commander. What on earth is it? Ethan shrugged. I don't know the specific situation very well, but according to Tyrande, Mr. Jared performed very well on the battlefield. He was brave, fearless, wise, and courageous, and soon won Lord Ravencase's trust and appreciation. Therefore, it is reasonable for him to be promoted to deputy. Jared, he is my biological brother, Maev's words revealed. A hint of deep emotional entanglement clouded her expression, as if she had experienced the changes of the 4 seasons in just a short moment. Her face shifted erratically, revealing the overwhelming struggle within her heart. Finally, she gritted her teeth, seemingly making an important decision. She gave up monitoring Ethan and resolutely turned around, striding towards the main hall. I will arrange for someone else to take care of you. Maev stopped, turning her head slightly. Also, I hope you didn't make fun of Jared. This is very important to me. Ethan watched Maev's retreating figure, a meaningful smile playing on his lips. He waved his hand slowly and said, Go slowly, Priest Maev. Oh, it seems my guess is correct. The relationship between Maev and Jared is still close at this time. I hope this news will help the Sisterhood speed up their actions, Ethan mused, looking towards the distant east, a deep light shining in his eyes. Although he was currently walking the world as a druid, his true power came from arcane magic. Therefore, even though he was thousands of miles away, he could still clearly feel the terrifying fluctuations of the huge energy source emanating from Lasal Raza. Well of eternity, you are both the source of power and the harbinger of disaster. Truly a double-edged sword that people both love and hate, Ethan murmured to himself. As the leader of the fighting priests, Maev's opinions held a decisive position within the Sisterhood, and even the High Priest Dejana could not easily ignore them. Under her firm promotion and advocacy, a consensus was quickly reached within the Sisterhood. Tomorrow night, they would officially break with the Moon Guards, break through the blockade of Lasal Raza, and try to reach the main battlefield before the war broke out. Although Ethan was nominally a druid, decisions within the Sisterhood of Elune seemed to have nothing to do with him. However, he had already made up his mind to contribute his own strength during the implementation stage of the plan. This would not only help the sisters, but also allow him to show his true strength in front of everyone and prove that he was worthy of Elune's favor and attention. The long day finally passed, and as the sky gradually darkened, the priests of the Sisterhood began to take turns sleeping to recharge their batteries for the upcoming battle. Tyrande was no exception. She found a quiet place to close her eyes and relax. But Ethan, having had sufficient sleep earlier, was full of energy and became even more excited as night fell. He couldn't wait to test his skills against the wizards of this world. The moon guard that blocked Lazal Raza stood like an iron wall on the outskirts of the city. They closely guarded the teleportation gate leading to the ground. Anyone without permission could not escape from this imprisoned city with the help of the teleportation array. Except for Ethan, no other member of the Sisterhood of Elune knew anything about the arcane magic that created the portal. After learning all this, Ethan secretly smiled bitterly. His current identity was just a druid. If he rashly used the methods of an arcane mage to build a portal, his true identity would definitely be exposed. However, druidic spells were fundamentally different from arcane magic. He had never heard of any druid who could cast teleportation spells. Of course, opening the door to the Emerald Dream was another matter entirely. In other words, Miev, the leader of the battle priests of the Sisters of Elune, placed her hands on the conference table in the temple, her eyes firm and resolute. If we want to leave this prison, conflict with the Moon Guard is probably inevitable. The priests present nodded in agreement, but High Priest Dejana seemed a little hesitant. She frowned and said worriedly, "Is this really wise? Although the Moon Guards followed the Queen's order and sealed us in Lazal Raza, they have always been believers of the goddess. Have we always treated our sisterhood members with great courtesy? Is it a bit too impulsive for us to launch a direct attack like this?" High Priest Dejana hesitated, and Tyrande could no longer hold back. Although she did not have much say in Lazal Raza, the continuous delays in supporting the resistance army pushed her to overcome her inner reservations. She stood up resolutely, looking directly into Dejana's eyes, and spoke firmly and sincerely. "High Priest, please understand that these are two different matters. Although the Moon Guards maintain respect for the sisters, this does not conceal the fact that they restrict our actions," Tyrande pointed out. "In their hearts, the Queen's orders are above all else. As long as the Queen commands, they will eradicate any enemy, including our sisterhood. If the Queen orders them to act against us, we will become extremely passive, as helpless as lambs waiting to be slaughtered." Her tone revealed deep concern, having witnessed firsthand on the frontline battlefield how the Moon Guards loyal to the Queen treated rebellious civilians. She was well aware of their methods and was unwilling to let the sisterhood fall into such a situation. To ensure the priestesses present understood her point, she recounted her experiences in Suramar and with the resistance. She described the civilians brutally suppressed by the Moon Guard, their helplessness and despair deeply imprinted in her heart. Tyrande's strong leadership shone through, successfully making many priestesses feel uneasy about their safety with just a few words. After listening to her story, the priests present looked horrified, realizing the fragility of their own safety. However, some were still hesitant and intolerant of being enemies with their compatriots. Seeing their concerns, Tyrande softened her tone slightly and continued, "Of course, I don't hope that the conflict between us will lead to bloodshed and sacrifice. But please remember, no one can predict what will happen during the battle. We can only prepare for the worst and fight for our freedom and survival." She glanced at everyone present and noticed that Dejana was not the only one with a hesitant expression. At this moment, another person stood up resolutely to support Tyrande's point of view. This person was Miev. "Everyone, please listen to me," Miev said, patting the table to attract everyone's attention. "Hesitating in battle will only lead to our own destruction. We may feel compassion for the enemy, but the enemy will not be merciful to us. When the time comes, my battle priest team and I will take the lead, and the other sisters must act according to the plan. We must not drag down the entire team because of mercy on the enemy." Her face became gloomy, and her voice carried a hint of severity. "You don't want to see your sisters die at the hands of the enemy, right? We can't let this happen." Compared to Tyrande, Miev had stayed in Lazal Raza for many years and had a deeper understanding and influence on the priests there. As soon as she finished speaking, Many people expressed their support. Seeing this, Ethan, who was leaning near the door of the conference room and listening, couldn't help but curl his lips. He was secretly glad in his heart. Fortunately, Maiev tried her best to help convince these priests. Otherwise, they would not know how long they would hesitate. It is taboo to not be firm-willed in battle. From this point of view, it was right for him to provoke Maiev with Jarod's incident. Chapter 659, Maev's Infiltration. On the day of the operation, the Temple of the Glory of the Moon maintained its usual solemn and sacred atmosphere. The afterglow of the setting sun bathed the golden dome of the temple in a soft, holy light. Around 7 or 8 p.m., the people trapped in the city entered the temple with pious hearts to participate in the evening prayer ceremony. Several priests dressed in white robes and holding moon wheels and staffs stood in the center of the temple, leading the believers in prayer. Their melodious and solemn voices echoed through every corner of the temple, making everyone present feel the blessing and warmth of the moon god. However, when the last group of moon god believers finished their prayers and left the temple with expressions of satisfaction and peace, the operations of the moon god's glory temple temporarily ceased. The once bustling temple became silent, as if waiting for something significant to happen. Under Maev's leadership, a group of combat priests armed with moon wheels, moon blades, and bows and arrows quietly appeared in the temple. They wore black combat robes and had firm, resolute expressions on their faces. At Maev's command, they quickly and orderly left the temple, sneaking into the depths of the city. Their figures moved flexibly through the shadows of the city buildings, as silently as ghosts. Their target was the animal pens guarded by the moon on the eastern border of the city. A large number of hippogriffs were kept there, and these excellent flying mounts were crucial to their mission. If they could recapture these mounts, even the ordinary priests with weak combat abilities could evacuate from the air first. The animal pens were heavily guarded by the moon guards, with about 50 guards in a squadron. Wearing enchanted metal light armor and armed with spears and shields, they vigilantly scanned their surroundings. Especially at the main entrance of the animal pen, more than a dozen moon guards were alert and ready for combat. Despite the tight defense, the battle priests were undeterred. Relying on their familiarity with the terrain and their excellent combat skills, they quietly approached the animal pen. The number of the assault team led by Maiev was almost equal to that of the enemy, but they were highly elite. They moved like sharp arrows, swift and precise. The other battle priests followed slightly behind, led cautiously by Maev's adjutant, Nasa. Their task was to ensure the safety of High Priest Dejana and other members of the Sisterhood. Maiev, known for her impatience, was even more anxious now that she knew her brother was leading the army on the front line. She took a deep breath and quickly gestured to the fighting priests hiding around her, signaling them to disperse. Her body swayed slightly as she used the Shadow Step skill, instantly escaping into the shadows. In the next second, Maiev appeared like a ghost in the shadow behind a moon guard at the main entrance. With a cold light flashing in her eyes, she silently swung the moon wheel in her hand. "Fan of knives!" she shouted coldly. Countless shadow-flying knives split and spread from her moon disk, like a dark storm enveloping all the guards present. Ethan stood not far from High Priest Dejana and witnessed the scene. He shook his head helplessly and said in a confused voice, "Is this considered a sneak attack? How is this different from a frontal assault?" Dejana smiled bitterly and shook her head. Maiev has always believed in one truth. No matter what the process is, as long as she kills everyone who sees her, it can be regarded as a perfect infiltration. Ethan couldn't help but roll his eyes at this. He glanced in Maev's direction and whispered, "I think you are not suitable for this kind of operation. You should join the Brotherhood." Despite his words, there was a hint of approval on his face. Maev's fighting prowess and courage were undoubtedly the best among the sisters, and even he was amazed by them. The sudden attack shattered the tranquility of the night. Painful groans and exclamations echoed from the ranks of the moon guards. "Ah!" A moon guard bent over in pain as a shadow-corroded flying knife penetrated the gap in his armor, causing him to lose his balance. Moments later, 5 more guards were struck by flying knives. They fell to their knees, clutching their wounds, struggling in agony, unable to rise again. The few guards who managed to escape were not unscathed. The wounds on their bodies were being eroded by the power of shadow, causing unbearable pain. These elite soldiers gritted their teeth, endured the pain, turned around, and instinctively waved their staffs, releasing streaks of blue-purple arcane energy. Boom! An arcane explosion erupted, and the brilliant light of energy illuminated the dark night sky. This is a technique mages often use to combat stalkers, allowing the arcane energy to burst out from the caster, attacking and repelling all nearby enemies. Generally speaking, stalkers are not as strong as warriors. Once hit by this move, they would most likely lose their ability to resist temporarily, becoming easy prey for the mage. However, Maiev was no ordinary assassin. She had already leaped back, leaving the scene gracefully. Like a nimble cheetah, she easily dodged the Moonguard's counterattack. Even in midair, Maiev did not cease her assault. She clenched the moon wheel in her hand, swung it hard, and threw it. The moon wheel traced an irregular and strange arc in the sky, like a bolt of lightning cutting into the formation from behind the Moonguards. The blades on the edge of the wheel made a harsh metallic friction sound as they rotated, cutting into the Moonguard's enchanted light armor and sparking. The Moonguards, already in disarray, scrambled to avoid the rampaging moonwheel. Their formation fell into chaos, and they were unable to organize an effective counterattack. Seeing this, Maiev's eyes flashed with a sharp light. She keenly identified the flaws in her opponent's formation. Without hesitation, she ordered, "Do it!" Following Maiev's command, the combat priests lying in ambush nearby launched their attacks simultaneously, like arrows. They wielded melee weapons such as moonblades and closed the distance with the Moonguards at lightning speed. Meanwhile, the remote support in the back row accurately timed their arrival, engaging before the enemy could react. This sudden wave of attacks caught the Moonguards off guard. They had no time to respond and were quickly surrounded by the battle priests. Not only the main entrance, but also the soldiers around the animal pen were attacked almost simultaneously. Although the sneak attack by the battle priests initially confused the Moonguards, as the elite of the upper elf mage army, they quickly overcame the chaos and barely stabilized their position. However, their formation was disrupted, and they could no longer organize an effective counterattack. Whoosh! At that moment, a blue-white arcane flare shot into the sky with a sharp, piercing sound. This was a signal for help from the Moonguards. They had realized they could not fight this sudden enemy alone. Tyrannid, who was in the rear, frowned slightly when she saw the signal flare and couldn't help but secretly praise. As expected of the Moonguard, able to respond so calmly despite being at a deep disadvantage. I'm afraid he will have to force his way in. Ethan also saw the signal flare and nodded in agreement. This was expected. Fortunately, the number of Moonguards dispatched is not large, and Queen Ashara has left the most elite combat forces on the main battlefield. Breaking out shouldn't be difficult. As he spoke, Ethan glanced at the chaotic battlefield. He saw that the battle priests were already engaged in fierce combat with the Moonguards. Although the Moonguards were quite powerful, they gradually fell into a disadvantage due to the coordinated efforts and brave attacks of the combat priests. Ethan believed that as long as they maintained this offensive, they would soon be able to break through Moonguard's defenses and successfully evacuate the city. Chapter 660, The Well of Eternity and Demonic Addiction. The raid by the priestesses went very smoothly, which relieved Ethan, who was on standby, from having to be so tense and ready to take action at any time. When he had free time, his mind would inevitably wander. There is actually a reason why Queen Ashara and the upper elves turned to the demons and split from the lower night elves. Deep in the continent of Azeroth, Zinashari's Well of Eternity is like a beating heart, continuously pumping out rich arcane magic. For the highborn who rely on its power, it is both a gift and a constraint. They must bathe in this magic regularly to maintain their strength and condition. Being away from the Well of Eternity, even for a short period, makes them feel an indescribable fatigue, as if their vitality has been quietly withdrawn. Most highborn are confused by this feeling, blaming it on various causes, without ever really getting to the heart of the matter. However, Ethan, a time traveler, has a deep understanding of this. He clearly knew that the feeling of fatigue and the desire for magic was actually a disease called magic addiction. After living in an environment with high concentrations of magic for a long time, the upper elf's body has formed a close connection with this power. Their blood, bones, and even souls have been deeply infiltrated by the magic of the Well of Eternity. Once deprived of this power, their bodies wither like flowers that have lost their moisture. This uncontrollable withdrawal reaction not only causes their combat effectiveness to drop significantly, but also puts their physical and mental state into a serious crisis. Therefore, these powerful magic sources, whether they are the Well of Eternity, the Sunwell, or the Nightwell, are the main culprits that corrupt the will of the elves. Throughout the history of Azeroth, these highborn elves and their descendants have been fighting against the shadow. Whether they are high elves or children of the night, they cannot escape the shackles of this fate. Even those Syndra who once tried to eliminate their addiction to demons by absorbing their evil energy, and the Shandara high-level elves who were tortured to madness by the demonic pain and finally provoked the blue dragon, were not spared. After losing the source of magic from the Well of Eternity, all descendants of the Highborn were inevitably addicted to magic. This desire and dependence on magic is like a black hole that cannot be filled, constantly devouring their will and strength. However, the High Elves and the Nightborn did not sit still and wait for death. After the High Elves traveled east, they relied on Dath Rema to steal the water from the Well of Eternity and create a new source of magic in the west, the Sunwell. The Nightborn of Suramar created a Nightwell through the Eye of Amanthul by the Grand Magister Elisande. Through these new sources of magic, they temporarily maintained their power and eased their addiction to magic. However, this approach is just drinking poison to quench thirst. Future history proves to Ethan that once they lose their source of magic, both the Children of the Night and the High Elves will fall back into an addiction that is difficult to quit. The power and glory they once had will gradually disappear with the onset of addiction. Therefore, from a certain perspective, Ethan agrees with Malfurion's approach of destroying the Well of Eternity. He believes that this does not mean that without the Well of Eternity, it is impossible to delve into the arcane arts and to defend family, country, and all of Azeroth. The future human mages directly prove this point. However, after losing the free source of magic power, their progress will definitely slow down, be much slower than in the past. But this price is for getting rid of the shackles of addiction and for true freedom and independence. Of course, Ethan's approval of the destruction of the Well of Eternity does not mean he desires for this mysterious source of magic to cease to exist. He knew that, although the existence of this power was tempting, it also came with huge risks. It would be best if, when Malfurion decided to destroy the Well of Eternity, Ethan could find another way to help them solve this big trouble without causing new disasters. Ethan's eyes stared at the battle in the distance, which was gradually settling down. His thoughts kept wandering and finally turned to the origin of the Well of Eternity. He murmured to himself, the life essence of the Titan star soul. Tyrande, standing next to him, heard Ethan's whisper. She turned her head curiously and asked, "Essence of life? What does this mean?" Speaking of this, she suddenly remembered the jokes Ethan had told her before and playfully punched him in the chest, feigning anger. "You are not talking about the essence of life." Ethan saw Tyrande's reaction and immediately understood that she had misunderstood his meaning. He quickly waved his hand and explained, "I'm not. I didn't. You're overthinking." He regretted a little. On the way, in order to tease this simple night elf girl, he had told her those harsh jokes. Now it seemed that these jokes had left her with a misunderstanding. This was thanks to the fact that the atmosphere of the Night Elves still contained some of the simplicity and toughness of the Troll era. If placed in a more civilized society, his behavior of telling dirty jokes to a girl he had only known for a few days would definitely be regarded as inappropriate. But in Tyrande's case, it just caused her to be playful. Of course, the charm of the Chinese language also allowed him to avoid the bad impression caused by talking nonsense to a certain extent. There is a saying that goes well, beautiful women are right in everything they do. This principle is the same for handsome men. Ethan shook his head slightly and brought his thoughts back to the situation at hand. He sighed and changed the subject. Now is not the time to think about other things. The moon guards outside the city should have heightened their vigilance. We must also make all preparations to meet the next challenge. As Maiev roamed the stable to support her, her elite combat priests quickly and decisively cleared the scene. Their movements were quick and orderly, showing extremely high combat literacy and tacit cooperation. After the battle, High Priest Dejana led a group of priests to the animal pen and began to treat the injuries of Maiev and others. Maiev frowned and looked at the bloodstain on her left shoulder, scratched by the arcane missile, feeling the healing power of the High Priest slowly flow into her body. They are indeed the most elite battle mage unit under Queen Ashara, Maiev sighed. In such a desperate situation of being attacked by a sneak attack, they can still show such a tenacious fighting will. Ethan nodded in agreement. If it weren't for Maiev's initial surprise attack and subsequent mysterious support on the battlefield, it would have been hard to predict the outcome of the head-on confrontation. Gugu at this moment, a gray owl descended from the sky and landed lightly on Nasa's outstretched left arm. After observing the situation outside the city through the eyes of the beast, Nasa frowned and said, "Your Excellency the High Priest, Lord Maiev, the moon guards outside the city have begun to gather at the mountain pass. Do we really want to break through from the front? In that case, this battle may not be as easy as before." After Dejana bandaged her wound, Maiev nodded firmly. "If you want to leave La Salle Raza, there is only one way to go. We have been mentally prepared. No matter what we will face next, no matter what the challenge, we must move forward bravely." "Then," Ethan volunteered, "let me help join the fight this time." "Then me too." Seeing Ethan stand up so decisively, Tyrande couldn't trust him to go alone. She took a step forward, straightened her back, and was ready to express her determination to join the fight together. "No." However, Ethan raised his hand to stop her from speaking. "Tyrande, why? I'll stay and act with the High Priest." Seeing the girl puffing up her mouth and showing an unconvinced expression, Ethan couldn't help but sigh inwardly. He walked up to Tyrande and said softly, "Do you remember our previous reconnaissance of La Salaza? You are the only person besides me who understands the terrain and conditions there. Your mission is very important. You have to lead the ordinary priests of the Sisterhood away from the battlefield and find a safe place to hide temporarily. Only in this way can we break through with all our strength without worries. Once we successfully break through, we will meet you immediately." Listening to Ethan's explanation, Tyrande gradually understood his intentions. Although she wanted to fight side by side with Ethan, she also knew that in the current situation, following his arrangements was the best choice. But Tyrande hesitated after hearing Ethan's arrangement. She had been very confident when discussing countermeasures before, but now she seemed a little unsure. She looked at Nasa next to her and said with some hesitation, "Can I really do it? How about letting Sister Nasa lead the team?" When Nasa heard Tyrande's words, she smiled and shook her head. She walked up to Tyrande, patted her shoulder gently, and encouraged, "Tyrande, you have to believe in yourself. As Ethan said, you are the most suitable candidate. You have excellent leadership skills and familiarity with the terrain, which are exactly what we need." High Priest Dejana also approached. She touched Tyrande's hair kindly and said softly, "My child, you have already experienced something like this once in Suramar, haven't you? At that time, you did very well and led everyone to a safe place. Now, you must be able to do it again. Treat us as the civilians of Suramar and use your wisdom and courage to protect us. Don't live up to your potential and don't live up to..." She did not continue, but Ethan knew what the High Priest wanted to say. Dejana's affirmative words gave Tyrande courage again. She nodded heavily, straightened her back, and said firmly, "I understand. Thank you, High Priest, for your enlightenment. I will do my best."